Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. I do best with some interaction. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, this very cold afternoon, this very busy afternoon. We really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for joining us at our second annual Wi-Fi Summit. My name is Ellen Satterwhite, and I'm a vice president with the Glen Echo Group, and we run the Wi-Fi Forward Coalition. It has been our privilege to work on these issues with a wide variety of members for, gosh, almost 5 years now. So I know I speak for the entire organization and my colleagues and the members of Wi-Fi Forward when I say I'm thrilled that you all could come. As many of you know, our group is dedicated to creating a wireless ecosystem that is fast, reliable, accessible, and as innovative as possible for as many people as possible. We believe that the path to do that is using our resources efficiently and effectively. We try to contribute to the dialogue on our wireless future by talking about balanced spectrum policies that support next-gen networks and having events like this and inviting smart people like the ones out there to come and talk about these issues. Just one look at how Americans rely on Wi-Fi today makes it clear that unlicensed technologies must be at the center of the nation's spectrum policies. Wi-Fi currently delivers over 50% of all internet traffic and over 60% of all mobile traffic. According to Cisco VNI, over 80% of all internet traffic will be wireless by 2021. And by that time, it's estimated that 86% of all wireless traffic will go over unlicensed wireless technology, primarily Wi-Fi, as opposed to 14% over licensed mobile networks. With wider channels and other technical innovations, the next generation of Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 6, is designed to support the data-intensive applications that will come with 5G and a more ubiquitously connected world. The companies in this room that you will hear from today that are members of Wi-Fi Forward are part of that future, and we're really excited to work with them. Simply put, Wi-Fi and other unlicensed technologies are central to people's everyday lives. They're critical to how global entities conduct business and deliver essential services, from medical telemetry and home security to critical machine communications and billions of dollars in secure financial transactions. But the full benefits of this technology cannot be realized without sufficient spectrum access. You know I was going there if you've been to one of these events before. Today we will hear from policymakers, business executives, and thought leaders about the latest in unlicensed and shared spectrum. And they will tell you what I said, but better. We're pleased to have these viewpoints from across the spectrum, pun intended, as we think about what's next. Around the space today, we also have an amuse-bouche of Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum, what it does already. We have time set aside later this afternoon for these expos and for networking, but feel free to take a break and visit our friends and colleagues around the room. I want to thank particularly Comcast, Google, and Connect Americans Now, which are demoing their innovations throughout the afternoon. So, without further ado, I will turn to our programming. Joining me first on this stage is Dr. Raul Katz, President of Telecom Advisory Services. Dr. Katz is a wireless economics expert, having produced significant research on the current and projected value of unlicensed and shared spectrum in the US and around the globe. Following a brief presentation, Phil Barenbroek, Senior Policy Counsel with Wi-Fi Forward member Public Knowledge, will interview Dr. Katz in a fireside chat. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Raul Katz.
The slides, but I'll try to illustrate them verbally. What I'm going to present very briefly, I have only 10 minutes, is results of a study that I had conducted a year ago, or at the beginning of 2018, where I focused on unlicensed spectrum in the US, and the second one that I completed recently, where I moved from not only the US, but also overseas, looking at Wi-Fi in particular. So I'm going to try to combine and merge some of the numbers for both studies. Next, please. The question that comes up, and this is very interesting because one might ask, well, why is this important? And it is amazingly important, and what I'm surprised is that given the level of importance of Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum, that there's so little in terms of academic research focused on this. And when I present, sometimes in conferences, I go and present to a bunch of nerds where we talk about different standards and technologies, but very little is being focused about the economic and social and political impact that Wi-Fi has. And just numbers help illustrate this. I mean, you basically have 85% of households, between 75 and 85% of households in all advanced economies that are Wi-Fi enabled, number one. Number two, then when you look at traffic, when you look at the time that we as consumers spend on Wi-Fi, and you see the numbers there, it's like between 50 and 60%, and you've got examples for not only advanced economies, but China, Brazil. So we spend more time on Wi-Fi than we spend on cellular networks. And in terms of number of hotspots, that's fundamental in terms of the amount, not only in terms of commercially driven access points, but also the importance that Wi-Fi has in civil society in terms of these community-based. So this is incredibly important. And then the question is, why is it that we're not studying it more? Why isn't it that we don't have more academics actually digging into the impact of this phenomenon? But let me move ahead. Basically, there are lots of questions, but my focus has been on assessing economic value. And assessing economic value because clearly it is easy to assess the economic value of licensed spectrum because we could stipulate that this is basically what is being paid at auction, and that's the value that people assign to that particular spectrum. But when it comes to unlicensed, there's no such a thing as auction because there's freedom of access, and therefore, can we actually calculate that in order to measure the policy trade-offs? And policy formulation is all about trade-offs. There's no such a thing as saying, well, I'm going to do this or that. No, it's like, what are the benefits, advantages and disadvantages of going into licensed and unlicensed? And in that context, creating an anchor point as to what is the economic value of that unlicensed spectrum is fundamental. Next, please. So we've been looking at this for a while, and the last bar is our study for Wi-Fi Forward that was completed at the beginning of the year, and you see that it grows over time. And some economists might say, well, but the applications that were measured at the beginning of the time period are not the same as the ones you looked at in 2020. And my answer is precisely. It's because Wi-Fi is such an environment that enables to bring more and more applications, more and more innovation, and therefore the economic value starts growing. Every time we look at this, every time I do a study, the value is larger simply because the number of applications, use cases, and the like that Wi-Fi stimulates is growing over and over again. Please, next. So, very rapidly, and too many words, and the issue is how to look at economic value. And I look at it in three dimensions. Consumer surplus, which is the value that we as consumers assign to Wi-Fi, and the difference between what we pay and the value that we stipulate there is. When we go into a Starbucks and we access the internet, we're paying zero, and yet for us, it has significant value. Producer surplus, that has to do with the margins generated by manufacturers of equipment or providers of service. And finally, GDP contribution. Clearly, things that go directly to the GDP. Consumer surplus doesn't. We're never going to see that on the GDP numbers, yet it's part of the economic value. And we look at it in terms of almost like a parfait ice cream. So we look at different applications, and for each of them, we start calculating and we're stipulating the sum of all those intersections is going to yield us the final number of what consumer economic surplus and what is the totality of economic value for Wi-Fi. Next. So again, a lot of numbers. You're going to get a copy of the presentation, but the headline says that In 2017, where we did the study for Wi-Fi Forward for the US, and that included all unlicensed spectrum, so not only Wi-Fi, but Bluetooth and Zigbee and wireless HART and the like, we got a number of $500 billion and 29 or 30 billion contribution to the GDP. And that's the bottom line. But then you look at it going forward and you see that the trends, the drivers of economic value are consistently growing. You see more and more traffic. I mean, right now, we're generating 17 gigabytes a month of traffic in our smartphones. 17. I remember when I first started looking at this, when we were looking at smartphones at the beginning of the year, when I did work for iPhone, 3 gigabytes was a big number, and we were surprised. Now we're at 17. And that's because the functionality of a smartphone is out of a tablet. So we're using it for everything. This is actually the difference between tablets and smartphones in terms of traffic is converging. And I think tablets is 22 gigabytes, in smartphones is 17. So it's more and more. So more devices, more usage, more applications, that is going to yield a larger number of economic value. Next, please. So when we forecasted for 2020 on the study done for Wi-Fi Forward, we were getting for the US close to 800 billion. And this is 2020, again, with a large GDP contribution. So big numbers. Now, the interesting thing that provided me this new study when I looked overseas is to what extent these trends actually apply to other countries, other advanced economies. And they do indeed. I looked at, and here we're looking just at Wi-Fi, not at other unlicensed spectrum applications, but we looked at Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, I believe France, and Korea. And clearly the numbers, the trends are pretty much the same. The numbers are increasingly important, so that what we had identified in the US has been verified across all advanced economies. And the difference is sort of like, in a different way than what we did for the US, we looked also at sources of employment. To what extent this is an industry, or the Wi-Fi applications that are generating jobs. We actually looked at the GDP contribution, worked through input-output tables for each of the countries, and sort of a classical methodology to stipulate employment. And we came up with a number of jobs that are quite interesting. They're roughly in, and this is the 2018, roughly 300,000 jobs in these countries. And that includes jobs in the industry that are actually operating Wi-Fi, in suppliers that provide inputs to the industry, being equipment and the like, or sort of workers that work in industries that provide goods that are purchased by people employed in the industry. Those are the induced workers. And it's 300,000. So this is a source of employment that is important. Just to compare, we're talking 300,000 jobs in Wi-Fi. The mobile carriers in these 6 countries employ around 1.4 million FTEs. So just for you to get sort of like an order of magnitude of how important Wi-Fi is in terms of employment. This is going to be important going forward. And 5G does not negate Wi-Fi. In fact, 5G complements Wi-Fi in terms of the value that is being generated once we start deploying 5G. We calculated that once we had numbers as to how much countries were going to invest in 5G, and we have some numbers in the chart. And then we simulated it, how much of that investment was benefiting out of Wi-Fi or different Wi-Fi standards to facilitate the offloading. And the numbers, both on a CapEx basis and on a CapEx plus OpEx, are also significant. So when we move to 5G, we're not going to negate the economic value of offloading. We are going to actually maintain it and actually enhancing it. Next slide, please. And then there's another twist that is kind of interesting, because we're looking at, and this is my last slide, we're looking at the equipment, the Wi-Fi enabled equipment numbers that go through the classical sort of access points and controllers and the like, but we were looking also at the echoes and the home security ones, and we're talking about $132 billion just in equipment. So my argument is the following. If we actually develop a policy that stimulates the development of industries in a particular country, we're going to benefit not only through the services that Wi-Fi generates, but also implicitly we're going to be doing industrial policy. We're going to be developing an industry. We're going to work along the lines of what the Koreans have done in terms of developing a telecommunications equipment industry. So this has benefits not only on the service provider side, but also in creating industries, in developing industries that in turn are going to be generating jobs, generating revenues. Next, please. So the implications are clear. This is critical. This is critical, and we need to develop all the policy mechanisms to stimulate the development of the industry. And this is, I'm talking a little bit to the choir in this particular area. Next. And if we don't do that, the trends are going to create a little bit of a bottleneck. This is growing dramatically. The numbers that I showed you at the beginning in terms of number of households, traffic, business traffic, they are growing all exponentially. So unless we make decisions relative to spectrum allocation to facilitate the development of the industry beyond what the impact could be on industrial policy side, is going to be critical in terms of the development of the wireless industry. And with that, I will shut up and listen to questions.
And now Dr. Katz will be joined by Philip Barenbroek of Public Knowledge for a fireside chat.
The lights are bright. So Dr. Katz, thank you for that presentation. And I've got a few questions for you, and if we have any time left over, I can throw it open for audience Q&A. So I guess to start out, my first question, companies like Strategy Analytics have been looking at Wi-Fi use in terms of data traffic. So what are we actually doing on Wi-Fi on the licensed spectrum? And in the latest set of numbers, they confirmed a trend that they'd been seeing for the previous 5 quarters, which was that consumers are using 3 times more data on Wi-Fi than they are on cellular networks. And that's true even in an era of unlimited data plans. What does your research and experience say about that trend, and why is that the case, especially given the unlimited plans we're seeing? Oh, I think you got one.
Oh, here. Yeah, I think that there are a couple of trends. One is the unlimited, and the other one is the faster speed on LTE. I don't know whether you've seen the last Open Signal report that shows that in certain countries, not the US, LTE is planned to deliver service at faster speeds than Wi-Fi, which we had accounted in our studies, in our international studies. This notion of return to speed that we call, that Wi-Fi is faster than wireless networks, creates value as well. And that's certainly the case for the US. It's certainly the case for some advanced economies, not for all. For instance, in France, now speeds in both services is actually gaining parity, so we didn't assign any value to that. But that being said, we still, as consumers, are conditioned quite a bit by past usage. And even though we might see that there is an unlimited, and unlimited I would put it between quotations, because there's no such a thing as an unlimited, because clearly, there's service degradation and consumers perceive that, which is why Strategy Analytics is still detecting that. We are not seeing, even in the countries where LTE is at a very fast speed, we're not seeing a decline in the usage. It's very hard to actually change behaviors of consumers in particular areas. And this notion that we get to the Starbucks, we get home, and we're going to really go accessing and serve the internet as much as we can, relying on Wi-Fi. And that's what we're going to see for a long period of time.
Thanks. So it's not a spectrum panel if we don't address 5G in some way. So to broach that subject, we continue to hear more about 5G every day. We continue to make policy for spectrum and broadband deployment, anticipating 5G to accommodate and accelerate 5G. We've seen, and I think Ellen mentioned this at the start, Cisco's global mobile data traffic forecast shows that more than half, and I think it's 60% now, of all mobile network traffic already is offloaded onto Wi-Fi, relies on unlicensed spectrum. What does your research, both here in the U.S. and globally, say about the importance of unlicensed for 5G networks? I know in your conversation you mentioned that the economic value of Wi-Fi is maintained and enhanced in a 5G world. Can you flesh that out for us a little bit?
Yeah, and this is very interesting because, I mean, when we started doing the research in the second study that I was mentioning, first, there was very little hooks from which you hang your hat in terms of what 5G is going to cost. As you know, this is clearly a big question. How much CapEx is this going to... there's one Ofcom study, and then some providers in certain countries, Korea, Japan, started putting numbers as to what the amount of investment was. So that was our first data point. The second one is, obviously no one has defined how the new standards are going to play within the 5G environment. Although it is assumed that there is a portion of the offloading traffic that is going to continue from there by. So what we have to do was that we had to build some simulation models where we are assuming that the 54 billion that is planned for a particular country, I believe it's Japan, already accounts for the benefits that are being derived by Wi-Fi. And from there, we had to stipulate the counterfactual. What would the amount be if Wi-Fi wasn't there? And the difference between the counterfactual and what they announced as the investment was the economic value to be derived from Wi-Fi. Interestingly enough, I mean, there's very little research conducted in the actual offloading in the new environment and what is the number that is going to yield. So we had to work through some of the parameter-driven analysis in order to determine that number.
So over the summer, you released a report, and the report asked the question of whether there's enough unlicensed spectrum that's currently allocated for unlicensed to accommodate the expected growth in Wi-Fi use. And based on the explosive usage rates we've seen over the last several years, if future assignments, we don't see additional spectrum allocated for unlicensed use that can be then used for Wi-Fi. What does it mean for the massive economic value creation that we've seen from unlicensed spectrum?
Well, one should say that from the time that we released this study for the U.S., which was, I think, April of this year, there's several, spectrum management decisions that actually favored what we were proposing in terms of the 6 gigahertz and the like. So we are assigning further bands to facilitate that growth that I was talking about. Clearly, if I look at the U.S. in relation to the rest of the world, the U.S. is really at the forefront of understanding these trends and assigning spectrum. That's no doubt about it. Maybe Ofcom is looking at these more and more. I think that they're at a time of right now in requesting comments for potential moves. India is considering it. It's interesting. The more and more I talk to regulators around the world, they are aware of the trend and the need, but they still haven't moved as decisively as the U.S. has. So now it is just a matter of actually putting everything on the table. So far, we're detecting some contention problems in public sites, and we were expecting that to happen as a result of limited amount of spectrum for Wi-Fi, stadiums and public facilities. So these recent decisions were clearly pointing in the right direction.
Traditionally in the licensed spectrum context, we hear a lot about the various types of propagation characteristics of the individual bands, and then the need to have a balanced spectrum portfolio of low band, mid band, high band millimeter wave spectrum. Is that also the case with unlicensed spectrum for Wi-Fi? Because I know if we think about FCC policies looking forward, we've set up some spectrum in the millimeter wave bands for unlicensed use. We've set up proceedings to look at unlicensed in the 6 gigahertz band. We've got the CBRS 3.5 gigahertz licensed by rule spectrum coming online, and there continues to be conversation around 600 megahertz TV white space spectrum for unlicensed. Is it important for to accommodate the growth in Wi-Fi use and the need for unlicensed that we have unlicensed spectrum in all of those bands, and what do we need going forward?
Yeah, I would let that question to be answered by the engineers, because I really, I would hate to play that. It would be too dangerous for me to look into that. I got to tell you though, it is interesting when we were looking at all these studies and we're trying to look at the research, how little sometimes is being done in some of these areas to understand what the impact of the engineering decision is going to have on policy. So we still have a long way to go in terms of digging deeper into this. I'm surprised that there's not more work in this area, given the importance that Wi-Fi has and unlicensed in general.
And then the last question I had before, potentially throwing it open for Q&A if we still have some time. You mentioned, there are numerous types of applications and new innovations that are stimulated by Wi-Fi and access to unlicensed spectrum. Can you talk about what some of the growing use cases are, what some of the growing applications and innovations are that we're seeing, that your research looked at?
I'll give you a couple that are maybe not sort of talked about a lot, but I think very interesting for me. One is precision agriculture, which is critical for rural areas. I mean, you'll be surprised how the yield of land increases by introducing precision agriculture, which essentially means you have to put Internet of Things sensors in all the different facilities that are actually dedicated to working on the land. That's critically important, and Wi-Fi enables that. The second one is the whole smart city dimension. And beyond what one might expect, we were looking at, for instance, the impact on traffic and congestion and carbon release and the impact on health. Things that maybe one might not be looking at in terms of, naturally speaking, but this is going to have streaming traffic is going to reduce carbon emissions, is going to have a positive impact on health. So there are some dimensions that are totally social, or the precision agriculture totally driven of the impact that you might have in the rural population of this country, and nevertheless are critically important. And we talk less and less about those. So I would call the attention on those as well.
So I think we have about 5 minutes left. Sorry. I think we have about 5 minutes left for audience Q&A. If anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question, I can call on folks. Anybody? Oh, in the back, Paul Margie. I think I'm blinded by the light up there.
So, Dr. Katz, in some of your papers, you talked about how much change there is from one paper to the next in terms of the contributors in Wi-Fi bands to economic value. Is there a way of capturing that as an economic value? In other words, if you look at the relative amount of innovation in different spectrum allocation schemes, you see unlicensed bands producing far more change from technological generation to generation versus other government decisions on how to allocate spectrum. And so you might see, your papers show that there's a steady climb in terms of absolute value, but is there also a value to the kind of low barriers to entry allowing rapid change in the use of that technology? And is there a way to measure that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Paul. I think that, yeah, one should, I could do that. I mean, the first thing I would do is just standardize the applications that we started looking at this in 2012 and see what the change is. And looking at the new ones that have come up along the way, and what were the potential strategic barriers to entry or the innovation rhythm that incentives that Wi-Fi provided for those to come up. And I think if you look just purely at the rate at which these things are increasing, or the number of applications is increasing, you could say that there is an acceleration of new use cases. The interesting thing that I see also is that sometimes the value of some of the use cases starts declining because they go through a natural life cycle, and others are increasing to compensate for that decline. And all in all, you get an increase. For instance, when we looked at this in 2014, tablets were hot. And Wi-Fi enabled tablets, as you know, 95% of tablets are basically Wi-Fi. They're not wideband enabled. So the value generated by Wi-Fi, by tablets was quite important. Well, clearly, with the merging of functionality between tablets and smartphones, the potential economic value derived from Wi-Fi enabled tablets started declining. But obviously, smartphones started increasing because we were using those more as a substitution device. So there are a number of puts and takes that are coming into play. And the fascinating thing is that each time we look at this, and I believe that even in the last assignments that I did, I haven't looked at everything in terms of potential economic value. I think that an exhaustive search would yield even higher potential value. And that has been the conclusion of every single academic, whether it was Milgram at Stanford, when they looked at it in 2011, they say, we were nowhere near looking at every single application that this is actually enabling. But I think that it's an interesting avenue in terms of the stimulus for rate of innovation as well.
Any other, how are we on time, by the way? Okay. I think we have time for one more audience question, a short audience question. Okay, I will take the question. In the study, you mentioned that there are about 120,000 jobs that are supported directly or indirectly by Wi-Fi use by unlicensed spectrum. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing as far as job growth, which sectors maybe are expanding? We're seeing new job creation due to Wi-Fi, and which areas we're in the future we're likely to see more job growth with Wi-Fi?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because the methodology that we use for job creation, job estimation, are input-output tables that actually are very static in nature. Each time the government, the statistical unit of the government releases a new input-output table, the intersectoral linkages change because the economy is changing over time. So doing a forecast in tomorrow based on the input-output tables of today would be somewhat underestimating the potential new jobs to be created. So we feel more comfortable about the 2018 snapshot that already gives us a sense of how important this is from job creation standpoint. And we would have to look at these going forward with the caveats that I just mentioned to you. So it's not that easy to do that.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Katz, for your presentation. And I will turn it back over to Ellen.
Thank you again, Dr. Katz and Philip, for asking the questions. Here's a logistical note. If you are standing and you don't want to be, there are a couple of chairs up front. I know some of you are like me, it's church, and you have to sit in the front pew, but there are some chairs up front, and there are a couple over here as well. Great. So from billions of dollars in economic value to critical services delivered, I think most of us have seen and can agree that Wi-Fi is the lifeblood of our wireless networks. As consumers, we think a lot about Wi-Fi at home or sometimes in the office, just on our devices. But these technologies are really doing the lion's share of lifting for high-capacity networks. They carry a lot of traffic for critical services in healthcare, education, and public safety. And we're lucky enough today to have a representative from one of our member companies, Bob Schroeder, Vice President of Product Management for Charter Communications, and he'll give a lightning talk on enterprise-grade advanced Wi-Fi applications. So please help me welcome Bob.
Thank you very much, Ellen, for the invitation to be with you today. It's an honor, and I have a lot of interesting perspectives I'd like to share with you about enterprise-grade Wi-Fi. It's very different than maybe what you're used to when you think about Wi-Fi. My name is Bob Schroeder, and I have the role of Vice President, Data Product Management at Spectrum Enterprise. And they've told me this is a lightning round, so I have a very short agenda. I'm going to introduce our company to you. I'll do some basic introductions of how we define enterprise grade of Wi-Fi. And then with enough time, I'm going to take you on a tour of some interesting use cases of how we've deployed Wi-Fi in the marketplace. But before I jump in, I thought you might want to hear a little bit more about our company. So I'm with Charter Communications. We're a 94,000 employee firm and $41 billion in revenue. We serve 26 million residential and business clients, and we're the second largest cable operator in the United States. Our company is the combined forces of Time Warner Cable, Bright House Networks, and Charter Communications. And we market our services through the brand we call Spectrum. Spectrum Enterprise is a part of Charter Communications. We're a $2.5 billion division serving enterprises in 32 metros and 41 states. We have 200,000 fiber-lit buildings, and we operate a wholly owned fiber network of over 230,000 route miles. We've been providing managed services for over 20 years. Spectrum Enterprise is the number 3 U.S. provider of fiber-lit buildings in the U.S., one of the number 4 largest Ethernet service provider nationally, and we serve the unique needs of that enterprise buyer. Our portfolio is dedicated internet, national WAN services, managed services, voice, video, and cloud and managed IT infrastructure services. We design and build and operate enterprise-class services that provide wireless mobility for mission-critical deployments. Enterprise-grade Wi-Fi is very different type of Wi-Fi. It's different than what you typically see with home Wi-Fi or small-scale Wi-Fi, small office or community Wi-Fi. A managed Wi-Fi service has very different design characteristics in order to serve the requirements of that very sophisticated buyer. It's a scalable product. It's end-to-end wireless networking solution that provides seamless Wi-Fi internet to guests, customers, employees, or students. Some of our specialized Wi-Fi deployments are in hospitals, sports arenas, hotels, and universities. Our portfolio provides business-class service levels demanded by our clients. Our deployments are engineered by an advanced wireless team to ensure our clients' expectations are met for network uptime, network coverage, performance, capacity, reliability, just overall performance of the network. So enterprise-grade Wi-Fi is significantly more complicated than a home office or a small office deployment. Major differences include, number one, the wireless design. It needs to ensure a high quality and ubiquitous coverage throughout the entire property. And it has to have smooth roaming between access points as devices move around the property. 2, it has to have high-capacity fiber redundant connections to the internet. 3, a fault-tolerant design. Think about the access points, the routers, the switches, the controllers. All of that has to be designed in a fault-tolerant, highly available configuration. 4, real-time network monitoring and management. And 5, finally, a customer care organization dedicated to serving the unique needs of a sophisticated buyer that may have trouble with Wi-Fi. So businesses expect industry experts to engineer and manage enterprise-grade Wi-Fi. We've acquired significant experience running our networks over the years. We have over 1,000 installations of Wi-Fi and over 100,000 access points managed in our platform. Our service is bundled and sold as a package solution to our customers. Our engineers design it, our field technicians install it, and our customer care organization cares for the service. So these are the elements that are critically important to ensure a highly reliable network for our enterprise clients. So I want to jump into a couple of use cases. We'll look at healthcare, sports, hotel, and university. So let's begin with healthcare. Medical equipment and patient services are constantly evolving, and they're becoming more and more connected, as we just heard from Dr. Katz. The network supporting these services must be designed for flexibility, to handle connected devices and applications within the healthcare network. And a high-performance network with Wi-Fi throughout the campus is an absolute must-have. A connected hospital is a place where wireless technology allows caregivers to roam throughout the campus while providing accurate and timely care. The data network driving Wi-Fi must be completely fault-tolerant. It's literally life or death decisions. Getting the right data at the right time for the right person at the right format securely every time is critical. Information clearly has become part of the standard of care in the healthcare market. Some of the key applications within a healthcare wireless LAN network include things like medical equipment, EKG, pumps, monitors, computers, and then for healthcare IoT, security cameras, HVAC, medical equipment, and of course, pharmaceuticals. But there's other applications running on that network as well, like digital room signage, patient surveillance, healthcare records, medical records, and of course the supply chain. So our company specializes in delivering reliable Wi-Fi in the healthcare deployments. There are 3 primary user groups we support with Wi-Fi. 1 is the patient, 2 is the caregiver, and 3, of course, are visitors. So we provide patients with Wi-Fi in their rooms so that they have access to entertainment and information. This helps them stay connected with friends and family, and it helps the healthcare facility keep the patient updated with the latest information concerning their stay. We provide visitors with internet access in order to communicate with others outside the facility. And we provide caregivers secure and ubiquitous access to internal data sources and medical information via connected devices in order for them to administer their care. So there's a core set of design elements required to support enterprise-grade Wi-Fi in a hospital. It has to be a reliable network. It has to have real-time monitoring. It has to have built-in data security for HIPAA. And the hardware has to be configured and deployed in the right places. Routine network hardware and software updates, and of course, management of the RF spectrum. The Wi-Fi network design is critical in this environment. Just adding more access points, not always the best course of action. A network device such as a smartphone is always searching for the strongest signal, and if you deploy too many access points in a hospital, you actually create more disruption and a chance of a dropped phone call or more latency or the inability to access the internet. So more is not always better in an enterprise Wi-Fi deployment. Network design is better. And that's what we do at Spectrum Enterprises. We specialize in providing sound internet design for the Wi-Fi. A key example of this is the managed Wi-Fi deployment at the William Jennings Bryan VA Medical Hospital. The VA Medical Center opened in 1932 and it has a strong and proud history of serving South Carolina veterans with the highest quality of health care. We designed, built, and we run that medical center. We have over 90 access points lit in 6 buildings across that campus. So that's a basic introduction to Wi-Fi in a healthcare facility. Let's turn now to another example. The Honda Center is a multi-purpose sports arena in Anaheim, California. It's the home to the Anaheim Ducks, which is a professional ice hockey team. That venue has seating for over 17,000, and since they opened the facility, 4,000 events and over 39 million guests. It hosts big events like NCAA men's basketball and hockey championships, concerts from like Garth Brooks, the Stones, Fleetwood Mac, etc. It's ranked as the second highest gross ticket sales in the West Coast, just after the LA Staples Center. So in 2017, Spectrum Enterprise designed and built a custom Wi-Fi deployment for the arena. It includes 277 access points and dual 1 gig fiber internet connections. So it's a big facility, lots of demand on the Wi-Fi network. As a spectator in a sports venue, we expect high-quality Wi-Fi. Everyone grabs their phone, we take pictures, we share them with family and friends throughout the entire performance or event. And that kind of sounds high-tech, but it's not really. Our experience, obviously, is going to change very, very quickly in these arenas. In the future, augmented reality and mixed reality, along with 3D cameras in sports venues, will give us a much richer experience. We're going to be able to interact with the action through an immersion type of experience. And participating in this level will require new technology, high-performance network, and of course, ultra-low latency in order to serve those needs. I enjoy open wheel racing, which is car racing, and I travel to different tracks around the country to watch auto racing. If you've ever done that, you don't see the cars very long. They fly by you really quick. But in the very near future, I'm hoping next time I'm at a race with my iPhone or tablet, I'm not only going to have multi-screens for seeing what the driver is seeing, but the 3D cameras in the event are going to be able to be displayed on my phone or my tablet, so I can experience the event in a much different way. Well, the technology is starting to arrive. It's changing. It's going to be very interesting in the near future. So let's change and look at hospitality for a second. Spectrum Enterprise provides networking services in over 16,000 hotels in the United States. The Hilton Hawaiian Village on Waikiki Beach is the largest Hilton property in the world. It has 8 towers and over 2,800 rooms, 22 acres of beachfront property, and it's one of the largest hotels in the United States outside of Las Vegas. So in addition to all this networking needs, Spectrum Enterprise provides Wi-Fi to that property. We've deployed over 1,700 access points, which is used to service guest Wi-Fi, as well as access to sensors, scanners, point-of-sale systems that are certainly used by employees as well as suppliers to the entire property. So it's a huge responsibility to supply Wi-Fi to the Hilton Hawaiian Village when you consider the number of guests coming in and out every day, and more importantly, the number of screens they bring with them: laptop, smartphone, tablet, game console. And the hotel Wi-Fi experience has to be absolutely outstanding in order to support a large number of guests with multiple devices banging on that network all the time. So now let me transition, since I have 3 boys in college, let's talk about education. And in the education market, Spectrum Enterprise supplies over 275 colleges and universities with networking services. And in addition to providing wireless for students and faculty, we've enabled advanced functionality in order to serve the growing needs of the campus life. It's a differentiated set of services we provide to the students. Students get unique credentials so that they can access the network throughout the campus, but more importantly, so they can onboard their personal devices. They can actually build personal area networks so that they can interact with printers and their phone, the TV, maybe a console, whatever they bring to school with them. And they can do that in a secure, reliable broadcast domain right on the network. So the service can be deployed in a fully redundant and highly available configuration to ensure reliability. And if you think about what students are doing all day, they're online all day, right? They're researching, they're studying, they're working with their course materials. Wi-Fi network has to be 100% online reliable. Well, the University of California, San Diego, it has 36,000 students, over 2,500 faculty members, and it's recognized as a public Ivy university, and it's ranked nationally. It's a public research university and occupies over 1,200 acres, so big school. Lots of students, a lot of need for networking. The school requires high performance, secure Wi-Fi to all the students and to the faculty on the campus. Course materials are certainly done online, and students need that technology in order to perform their activities. Spectrum designed and operates the Wi-Fi network for that university and their graduate student dorms. So that's a quick introduction to managed Wi-Fi deployments in some very interesting real-world use cases. They are different than what we typically see with public Wi-Fi, community Wi-Fi, and certainly home Wi-Fi. Spectrum Enterprise continues to innovate our managed Wi-Fi service portfolio in order to serve the most demanding developments or deployments for hospitals, sports venues, hotels, and of course, universities. And our focus is a robust network that supports the quality of service requirements of the most demanding devices while also providing network access to every device and every user and every screen. Our objective is what we call the quality of experience for users. Whether they're a business professional, a student, a caregiver, or a health caregiver, a sports fan, it doesn't matter. Their experience needs to be of a high reliable fashion. So that was an introduction to some of the use cases we deploy for Spectrum Enterprise and for our clients. I hope this information was interesting and helpful. It should be a little different than maybe some of the other topics you're going to hear about today. But the fundamental point is still the same. In order to supply that high-level, high-performance, guaranteed network, we need increased technology and bandwidth and services to do that. It's a very important step in the evolution of this industry. So I want to thank you for the invitation to join you today, to take you through on a couple of these use cases, and to share with you what the enterprise is doing with these advanced wireless mobility technologies. Thank you very much. Ellen.
Thank you very much. So we'll now just take a brief break for folks to get a refreshment and stretch your legs and visit our exhibits, and we'll reconvene with a couple of members of Congress who would like to talk to you about Wi-Fi. So enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Programming will begin in 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Programming is about to begin.
Welcome back. I got ahead of myself. Yeah. Welcome back. So earlier this month, I read a great story in The Hill, and it starts in the trenches of a nuclear waste repository. Some of you may have read it. The two lawmakers I have the pleasure of introducing now, one an Ohio Republican, the other a California Democrat, built what sounds like a strong friendship in Nevada, and they have teamed up on a number of things, but most recently formed the Bipartisan Congressional Wi-Fi Caucus this October. Launched in the height of election turmoil, they put forth this effort to have an open and constructive dialogue about the wireless networking concerns that touch people's lives or are about to. Things like 5G, cybersecurity, smart cities, and spectrum optimization. These members have extensive experience with policy discussions around the Internet of Things, connecting all Americans to broadband. We're thankful for their leadership on these issues and are excited to have them join us this afternoon. They're joining us for a fireside chat moderated by Rachel Welch, Senior Vice President for Policy and External Affairs with Wi-Fi Forward member Charter Communications. Please welcome to the stage Representative Bob Latta and Representative Jerry McNerney.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us, and Congressman McNerney for making it over here. I know it was difficult getting across town, so thank you so much. So I thought I'd start us off with a softball warm-up best thermostat. My kids are on Xbox. My favorite device is my Sonos system. I'm curious if you guys have a favorite device or gadget that you use over Wi-Fi.
Well, my favorite is the cable box that connects me to everything else. And you may ask me what my favorite name is, but it's a private name. I really don't want to tell you what it is. But the nice thing is you can give it its own name, and you can remember it for that reason. And it connects me to everything in the house and everything in the world.
I don't have one yet, but I'm thinking about getting this. I like being out in nature and outdoors, and you can get different devices now that you can actually see what animals are out in a certain area, and you can watch it from miles away, and so that'll probably be the next purchase.
Okay, thank you. So as Ellen said, you all have recently launched the Bipartisan Wi-Fi Caucus. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought about your interest in launching a caucus and what you plan to focus on?
Well, first I think it's important that Jerry and I are we're on different sides of the aisle, but these are issues that affect all of us, and it's not a Republican, Democrat, or Independent issue. And when you're looking at Wi-Fi and the uses out there that we have to have it, and why we need it, and because I look at my district, I have 60,000 manufacturing jobs. I have the largest farm income producing district in the state of Ohio. That we find a lot of issues that are very common for all of us, but we have to make sure that we have that Wi-Fi out there, because if we don't, people aren't able to communicate and do the jobs, or maybe even have a job. So that's one of the big things for me, to make sure that we get this out across the country. because it's where, we're looking at the future.
Well, Bob and I are on the Committee of Jurisdiction on telecommunications. We went to Yucca Mountain together, and we realized we actually were friends. And so we started talking about what we could do to further the technology, to make sure that there are standards in place, and that innovation is given free rein. So between those ideas, I think it was a natural fit for Bob and I to form this caucus.
That's great. So sticking with the issue of bipartisanship, you both have spoken about how Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum issues are nonpartisan in nature. Are you finding that your colleagues agree with you on this?
I think it's a good question because, a lot of times I know back home people say they turn on the news and say, why can't you people ever get along on anything? And it's just like Jerry mentioned that we serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I believe we've sent out 139 bills this Congress. 92% have been bipartisan. So there's a lot of issues that we find that we can work with each other on, and I know there's multiple Democrats on the committee that I work with. Jerry and I have worked on many different issues together, but I think it's really pointing out to people that, you find those things that you have in common, and it's not like a Midwestern or a Western issue. It is a issue that we all have in common. So I think when we look at it, especially on committee, there's a lot of issues that maybe that we're not sponsoring, but other members are doing the exact same thing. Everyone's reaching across the aisle to work with someone.
Well, Representative Lott is right. There's a lot that we can work on without any real partisan rancor. I mean, anyone can raise an issue to partisanship if they wish to, but on Wi-Fi and telecommunications, there's a lot of opportunity, and if we pursue that opportunity, we can create jobs in our districts, which is very important to members of Congress. And so it's natural for us to work on a bipartisan way on this kind of issue. It's technical, so there's not a natural pin for partisanship. I mean, we can talk about the spectrum and the 5.9 portion of the spectrum and the 6G portion of the spectrum, and whether you're Democrat or Republican, it doesn't come up.
Just follow up on that because we hear a lot of testimony that comes through. When you hear things like kids that live maybe in one of the. How do we make sure that we get this across the country? Because there's so many uses. A lot of times you think about all the games and things like that, but it's on the educational side that's so important that we make sure that people can advance, because you can't if you don't have the service.
Absolutely. Maybe on this one I'll start with you, Congressman McNerney. We have a really large freshman class coming in, really diverse, the most diverse class they've said in the history of the Congress. Do you think that the bipartisanship on issues like this will continue with that class? A lot of them campaigned on the idea that they wanted to find areas of common ground. So are you hopeful that you'll have an opportunity to work with some of those freshman members as well?
I think the overwhelming consensus is that we actually get stuff done. And so this is an area where there's a real opportunity to get stuff done, and I wouldn't expect there to be too much motion to move in that direction of partisan rancor. People come here by and large, they want to do things, and you sort of get caught up in the partisanship because it's there and it's overwhelming at times. But on issues like this, no, I don't see any opportunity for that to rear its head up. I wanted to give a little analogy, but I think I'll pass because it's they say when you go to Congress, it's like going to jail. You got to join one of the two big gangs to survive. But I don't see that really applying in this situation.
Well, I think it's also important because when someone's coming in, I'm not sure, Jerry, when you first were elected, what different committees you served on, usually you don't get on Energy and Commerce right off the bat. And so I served on 3 different committees early on. I was on Transportation Infrastructure, the Budget, and I was also on Ag. And so I think it's important for new members coming in that sometimes they're going to get assigned a committee, but they need to really delve into the issues that are in that committee and then they find out that there's other areas that they can branch off from that, or they might come in with an interest right off the bat. But it's pretty tough when you're not on a committee of jurisdiction to get a piece of legislation passed if you're not on that committee. So it's important for new members to understand that they might have a bunch of ideas that they might have, but delve into what they're working on, and then they can work across the aisle with everyone else. Because again, a lot of the issues we deal with aren't Republican, they're not Democrat. It's what affects all of us, and that's again with the Wi-Fi that we found.
That's great. Well, so people talk a lot about having a balanced policy towards spectrum. And recently this year, Congress passed the Ray-Baum Act, which included a provision that requires NTIA to look for both licensed and unlicensed spectrum of below 8,000 gigahertz. I'm curious if you all believe that Congress has taken the right balanced approach, and if there's more that needs to be done in order to have a balanced approach to spectrum allocation and spectrum policy.
Well, I think balance is really important. We need licensed spectrum so that we can develop 5G technology and so on. But the real important issue here is that 60% of 5G traffic is downloaded or offloaded to Wi-Fi, or to unlicensed, not to Wi-Fi, but to unlicensed spectrum. So we need a balance. And the nice thing about unlicensed spectrum is that it spurs so much innovation. If you provide enough unlicensed spectrum, you're going to see a lot more innovation take place. And so I want to make sure there's a good balance between those two. And I think the Ray-Baum Act kind of does that, but we need to keep an eye on it and make sure, for example, the 5.9 portion of the spectrum that was initially devoted to automobiles, and we haven't seen that be used. So let's take a look and see whether that's something we can open up without endangering auto safety in the future.
Yeah, I think Jerry's right, because again, you're looking at, you want to have that good balance between the licensed, the unlicensed side, and you want to make sure as we go forward that we always have this in mind, is that we want the technology, we want the innovation occurring in this country, and so we have to move that forward that direction.
Thank you. So another thing that we're seeing coming is a spectrum crunch with Wi-Fi. So 2.4 has gotten congested, the 5 gigahertz band is getting more congested. Industry, I think, has recognized this. Congress is looking at it. The FCC is looking at it. Do you have thoughts on how we're going to address the needs for unlicensed spectrum going forward, given this crunch?
Well, this is bad. Sometimes you can't remember how many years have gone by, but I know that we were talking about what are we going to do in the future, but it's also looking at anything that's on the government side, let's just say, that's not being, either not being utilized or very much underutilized. And, going back with the FCC or NTIA and saying, okay, we need help here to find out where all this could be located. But at the same time, we've got to look at across the entire, the spectrum out there, you might say, to find out where is this located. And sometimes, some agencies or departments might say, you can't have that because we need this. And then, you press them, and after a little bit of time goes by, all of a sudden say, well, actually, yeah, we don't need all of it, and you can get something, we have to be able to squeeze everything we possibly can get out. Because what we're seeing out there is, as Jerry alluded to, that when you're looking at the traffic that's being, half the traffic now is out there on the internet with Wi-Fi. When you look at everything that's occurring and the amount of technology that's there and the investment, we've got to make sure that on the government side, we're doing our part to make sure that we're not tying things up to stop this innovation from occurring.
Well, Rachel, that's a really good question. And I think we need to look at efficiency, because spectrum is a finite resource. There's only so much of it. We can allocate some here and there, but what we need to do is make sure that the spectrum is being used wisely. But also, I want to make sure that there's innovation so that more and more use takes a narrower and narrower part of the spectrum, and that includes using multiple applications on any little part of the spectrum that don't interfere with each other. It means just letting technology do its thing, because that's what we're going to have to depend on.
Yeah, having smart technologies that can share spectrum as opposed to having it allocated for a single technology, those types of things. So you both, let me switch topics a little bit here to the Internet of Things. You both have been involved as leaders, and congratulations, Mr. Latta, on your bill passing the House yesterday. So you're both the leaders on the IoT issue, and this is an area where internet in IoT usually means wireless, and it's often utilizing Bluetooth or other technologies, Wi-Fi, other technologies like that. What do you see for the future of these types of applications in IoT?
Well, I think it's wide open. It was in the 114th Congress. It was Peter Welch and I formed the working group of the Internet of Things. And I think that, Jerry, I think you attended every one of the meetings. I think we had 6 different, they weren't quote-unquote hearings because we weren't conducting hearings, but the meetings that we had. And we broke them down into different sections. Each time we had one on autonomous vehicles. We did one on medtech. We did one on financial. We did one on manufacturing. In the businesses and factories to make things work better. I mean, the future is wide open, but we have to make sure we have the ability to get this done. And it was interesting that in every, if you could have been blindfolded and never knew where somebody was from that was before us that day, if they were from the East Coast or the West Coast or the Midwest, but everyone said the same thing. We're not against regulations, but when we do have regulations, give us soft touch regulations so we can go out there and innovate and move things forward. Because, if you've ever been to Silicon Valley and some of the other places where a lot of the innovation is occurring and they have a room maybe this size, that you'll have, everybody out there working, but in the corner you never find, their attorney or their compliance officer or something like that. They need to have that ability to go out there and innovate and move these things forward. Because again, when I see what's happening in a short period of time and how fast it's moving, we want to make sure that we have that ability, especially with the IoT, and then also making sure, like the legislation that came through yesterday that was passed, is making sure that the Department of Commerce is working, that we all know what everyone else is doing, and we don't have those roadblocks being put up.
Mr. McNerney, what about you?
Well, thank you. I'm glad you asked this question, Rachel, because the Internet of Things is so exciting. I mean, we look at if every household in this country has 10 IoT devices, in Europe the same thing, in China the same thing, and we're talking about billions of devices out there. So giving the technology the opportunity to expand into areas that are going to make a difference in our lives, I think it's very important. It's going to help us with the digital divide, and I think you'll bring that up as well. But the thing we need to be concerned about is cybersecurity. Because if these devices are turned on their owners, or if they're turned on websites like the DDoS attacks that we've seen in the past, then we have problems. So we need to have basic minimum standards for these IoT devices, no matter whether they're communicating with Wi-Fi or some other means, Bluetooth or whatever we have out there. But we need to make sure these devices have minimum standards that they are shown to comply with those standards. And I think that'll make a lot of difference in terms of the security as we move forward with all of these devices that are coming into our daily lives.
In your experience, have you had any opportunity to think through the other types of applications beyond consumer applications that might utilize IoT technology for healthcare or for education that might help bring new services to people that might otherwise not have them?
Well, one of our hearings, Ohio State testified on the medical side and with the research that they're doing and how it's being applied. And so just hearing the testimony of that day, but also going out, because it's when I was down at Ohio State on another occasion, that the clothing that you might be wearing that will be communicating for people that have different types of diseases that will help them maybe not overcome it but be able to live with it. And so all of the different technologies being put into fabric that people are wearing to make sure that they can live a better life. And so on the medical side, it's huge. On the agricultural side, because it's going to help on the ag side into the future, not only for our ag producers out there, being able to make sure that they can get their crop in and get it out and make more money, but it's also going to help the environment. Because my mom grew up on a farm in Northwest Ohio. My wife comes from a farm in Northwest Ohio. My grandfather used to, back when early days, he farmed with a team of horses. And just give you an example that I was out there showing that they could go out and, because with the ability with Wi-Fi and everything else out there, that they would be able to put fertilizer in the ground in the fall in a furrow, not on top, and then in the spring they'd be able to come back within 1 inch and plant corn right there. And so you wouldn't have runoff and everything else. And so they asked me if I wanted to drive the tractor. I said absolutely. And so when I got down to the end of the row, my grandfather would have been so proud of me, because I mean it was as straight as an arrow. And the reason was I never touched the steering wheel. That's the technology that's out there today.
That's great.
And so we were seeing it, when I say it's across the board what's happening, this is what makes it so exciting when you go out and actually see it. And that's why we want to promote it, and we want to make sure that it's out there.
Mr. McNerney, do you have anything?
Well, health and agriculture too is I wanted to talk about, Bob, so thank you. But, you know, a lot of people wear the devices on their wrists to tell them how many steps they've taken, and that's just the beginning in terms of healthcare, because you can monitor all your vital statistics. You can have that communicated to your physician or to some other provider, and it'll keep you healthy and alive for a lot longer. So I think that's something that people are going to be more and more interested in as we move forward. In agriculture, I'm from California, and we're very concerned about our water supply. So having sensors that tell us the exact optimum amount of water that is needed for specific plants is going to make our agriculture not only more productive, but it'll make it more conservative in terms of water use. So I think those are two very important applications. There's a lot of others. Automobiles, of course, we all know about our automobiles using Wi-Fi to talk to each other, to make it more safe, and so on. So we have a tremendous opportunity to improve the lives of so many people.
Well, and you know, there have been a lot of conversations and a lot of estimates made about the benefit of unlicensed spectrum to the economy. So I looked up a couple, and it looks like in 2017, it was estimated that technologies and output from utilizing unlicensed service was about $525 billion. Earlier today, we heard that there are projections that by 2020, it will be valued at about $800 billion to the economy. So I'm curious, what sort of economic benefits are you seeing in your districts that you're seeing close to home in ways that they're helping your constituents?
Well, sure. I think the thing in my district that's so important is the digital divide. If we can use Wi-Fi to close that digital divide and make sure that folks have access in schools. For example, there's a bus system that takes folks from the cities in my district to the Bay Area, and it's a long ride, and they're putting Wi-Fi on those buses so that folks can be productive on that ride. We want to make sure that they have Wi-Fi in schools so that children in school have an opportunity to have access to educational opportunities on Wi-Fi. So, and also small business can benefit very significantly from Wi-Fi. So, I think the digital divide is the thing that's the highest on my mind at this point.
Well, you know, Ohio, we're one of the top in the country when you're thinking about auto manufacturing. And you know, I wrote, and with great help from our friends on the other side of the aisle, we got the autonomous vehicle legislation passed out of the House. And it was, I tell you, this is again, we're showing bipartisanship, because when we worked on that, we had, it's estimated over 300 meetings that occurred on that bill before we brought it up to committee. And that bill passed out of committee 54-0. And when you think about all of the, you know, especially with automobiles, unfortunately what we're seeing is, it's tragic, we're seeing more fatalities out there. We had 37,000 individuals that were killed in traffic accidents last year. But, you know, you turn the TV on now and you watch the car commercials that are they're showing a lot of the vehicles right now are at a level 2. You know, you can, like last night I watched somebody trying to parallel park a car here in town. They needed one of these devices. They could have parked the car for them. But, you know, the car can be, you know, it needs the technology out there. And, you know, when you think about, like in trucks, the sensors that are there to tell maybe something might be going wrong, that they can get it fixed in time, that's going up. But we need that Wi-Fi. So we look at it, again, across everything that was happening. But that's what makes this such a great area, and why we have to make sure we get it done, because that's where the future is. It's not going to go back, and it's not, I tell folks, it's not that we need less, we need more, and so this is where the future is going to be.
Well, one thing that I had not known before I came today is that they're rebranding Wi-Fi technology. You gentlemen probably knew about this, but it used to be that it was everything was 802.11b, 802.11ax, 802.11ac, and for consumers, it's really confusing, right? You don't know what's the better network, which one should I sign up for. So now they're rebranding it. Wi-Fi 1, Wi-Fi 2, Wi-Fi 3. So the next standard that's coming out is Wi-Fi 6. And as I understand it, it's going to be faster and even better for when you're using multiple devices. So in my home, I was just saying earlier, my son gets really upset when his games lag. Now, I don't care so much about that. I'm more upset when I can't send my work product back to my boss. But, what do you think that this new generation of Wi-Fi will do for your constituents and for Americans across the country?
Well, I think you touched on it right off the bat because, again, faster is better. If you think about years back, I mean, this is go back to your earlier computers. It took, first of all, it took them forever to even get online, and you hear the beeps and everything else. And so that speed's going to help in a lot of things, and especially, let's go back to the medical for an instance. With rural hospitals, with what they're doing out there, they will be able to have someone, miles away help in an examination or in a diagnosis, and it can be that much faster for an individual to get that done. So but you look at everything that we can be doing, and again, with all the different areas, again, in factories, it'll make them more efficient. They'll be able to produce more product at a lower cost, but it'll be safer. So you go through, you just go down the entire line from one industry to another or to the financial side, and you'll find that there's going to be so many more things that will be able to be done because of having that there. So again, as I said, it's, the great thing about being on the Energy and Commerce Committee is that we're looking 5 to 10 years over the horizon. We're not looking in the rearview mirror. We're not looking at the end of the car. We're looking way over the horizon. And so that's so important for us because we have to be able to say, you know what, we want to make sure that we're passing the legislation that's going to be helpful, not a hindrance, and that the regulations that would come are the same way that they're going to be helpful.
Well, Wi-Fi 6, it's just a bigger burst into the same spectrum, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. But also, it's more efficient. It's going to use less energy, and I'm someone that believes in climate change, and I like to see more efficient devices in our homes. So this is a step in the right direction. I think we need. That's an example of the kind of technology and innovation that we need to continue to see in this country and be leaders in this country.
Absolutely. Well, obviously you two are thought leaders in this area, and we so appreciate your time coming here today, all of the effort that you put into understanding and learning these issues and being leaders on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future and working with you.
Well, thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
So I'd like to echo Rachel's thanks to Representative Latta, Representative McNerney, and personally thank Rachel. Our next speakers have also had an extremely busy year. They've been, as always, leading on balanced spectrum policy in a bipartisan way. Their leadership in urging the Federal Communications Commission to unleash more unlicensed spectrum and shared and coordinated spectrum for uses like Wi-Fi has been critically important. They both start from clear policy priorities. How do we make the most efficient use of a scarce resource to boost innovation, connect the most people and things, and stimulate economic growth and investment? From 5.9 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz, from 3.5 gigahertz to 3.7. That joke isn't as funny as my earlier one, so that's okay that you didn't laugh. But these policymakers are certainly not in lockstep by any means, but have been aligned on finding a way to make balanced spectrum policymaking happen. And it's just in time. As we've heard, failing to increase the availability of unlicensed spectrum to support the projected growth and reliance on Wi-Fi and other unlicensed technologies will have genuine economic consequences. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage moderator Rachel Nemeth, Director of Regulatory Affairs with the Consumer Technology Association, also a Wi-Fi Forward member. You may be sensing a theme. And FCC Commissioners Mike O'Reilly and Jessica Rosenworcel for a fireside chat on what's next.
Thank you, Ellen, for that lovely introduction, and thank you to Commissioner O'Reilly and Commissioner Rosenworcel for being with us here this afternoon. So we just heard from the congressman about what is going on the Hill. So now we get to hear from the commissioners about what is going on at the FCC about Wi-Fi. So let's just start out with some general policy questions here. First of all, we're looking at there's a lot of innovation in this space, obviously, and we're looking at specifically innovations in the technical and business space, but what do you both think about potential innovations in the regulatory space to help promote some progress in this area?
What, you want to go? All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Much appreciated. And it's so good here to be with my colleague. I'll say I understand these sunglasses that are out in the back there. Makes a lot more sense as you, wow, it's really bright up here. But that's okay. I appreciate your questions. It's very helpful. Progress on the regulatory front is sometimes slow moving. We have done a great deal of work, I think, my colleague and I, and convincing my fellow colleagues that the changes need to be made to spectrum policy to make sure that unlicensed is part of that equation, to make sure it's done thoughtfully and move forward as fast as possible to address the lack of frequencies that are there today. So I don't think you have actually one particular regulatory moment and you say, well, this is a change that's going to really free up these bands. It's a lot of hard effort and a lot of hard work on a day-to-day basis.
Well, thank you for having me here, and I agree completely with my colleague. You can mark that down. Yeah. I think the good news is with both of us lending our voices to this effort to find more unlicensed spectrum, it's getting more attention at the agency right now. And I think there are real possibilities coming up in the 6 gigahertz band and the 5.9 gigahertz band, and I think you can count on the two of us continuing to press forward to make that happen.
Great, thank you. And speaking of both the 5.9 gigahertz band and the 6 gigahertz band, there's a lot going on in those areas right now. Specifically on the 5.9 gigahertz band, you both have said that the time is now for the FCC to take a fresh look at what's going on with the band. And then also just today, actually during this event, I believe, RAND released a major study about the 5.9 band, and I just was wondering if either of you have had a chance to look at the study or have anything you'd like to share about it.
You go first this one.
All right. 100, what's the statistic exactly?
I think it's like $100 billion.
$100 billion. Mm-hmm. That's extraordinary. We should embrace the economic possibilities of bringing that to market and allowing all that permissionless innovation to happen. It's why I believe both of us support the FCC taking a fresh look at this band, and I think we need to start doing that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that we both made the point that now is the time, but actually it was a couple years ago or a decade ago. I mean, we constantly make that point. I'll take it now, though, and I think that message is resonating, and it's a need to re-examine 5.9. I don't think that the activity from one big car company this week that made anyone too comfortable about past promises that they've made. And so if you're thinking about what they're going to promise on DSRC, I'm not feeling too comfortable. It just heightens the need to re-examine 5.9. And I think the study, which I didn't get to read complete, but did see the highlights of it, I think are incredibly, incredibly insightful for what it can be beneficial to the American public.
Great, thank you. And now moving on to the 6 gigahertz band. I know there's been some activity at the Commission about this particular band. What do you both see as the next steps regarding 6 gigahertz and also with the specific proceeding that the FCC is looking at?
Well, I think I actually have to check on exactly if that item's been published, but we're in the process of getting comments on the NPRM that we put out, and agreed to unanimously at the commission. There's certainly a number of open-ended questions in there, and we're going to expect a lot of smart and intelligent comments to come in to help fill in some of the pieces before we get to final rulemaking. But if I had my druthers, I'd like to believe that we can close that in a relatively short time period. I'd like to see something we couldn't do by the end of this year. We certainly have an issue of those that are there and addressing the mitigation, mitigation of interference if it does come up, and the calculations that have already been provided, a number of studies that have already been submitted along these lines. So if it does develop, we want to make sure that it's addressed. But we don't want to go too far in that range. So it's trying to balance those things, and we'll see what the comments lead us in what direction they take us.
Oh, this is getting tedious because we agree.
I know, I need to try to find something where...
No, it's really exciting because we've got these great wide swaths of spectrum, and we could do some really amazing things in this band. Yeah, I think it's also important we try to explore beyond low power and indoor devices. And I'm hoping that the comments that come in help the agency.
A bit more of a fun question. Since this is the Wi-Fi Summit, we're talking about all the great technologies that Wi-Fi enables. Do you each have some favorite uses of Wi-Fi, some favorite devices, any games, anything that you'd like to share?
I wonder if you think he's the gamer or I'm the gamer.
I did not have a preconceived...
I am not a gamer. As I've said multiple times, I just have a new baby. I don't have any time for any gaming in any capacity. I don't have any time to watch even television. So my world is really defined by somebody else. I will say I'll give you two examples of Wi-Fi in my current. I just hooked up our AC unit / heater, new unit to Wi-Fi, so get new downloads in terms of software, and also be able to adjust when my wife tries to change the temperature on me. I can adjust from my phone. And then the two is that we do have a kid-friendly device for video that's monitored. It's a very cultivated community, but I'll tell you, when we leave the house and our Wi-Fi signal goes, halfway down the block, my daughter goes crazy because now it's limited to the number of videos that we've already downloaded to like 5 instead of the 35 that she's used to, and that makes me want to go back and put my car in the parking lot or back in the driveway. So those are two very personal things that I use Wi-Fi today, notwithstanding the host of other uses myself. But right now it's all about new doctors.
Okay, well, for me, it's all about streaming to the speakers throughout my home. I don't like to clean. I'm not one of those people who takes satisfaction from neat surfaces and piles at right angles to one another. So once a week, I put myself through the torture of walking through the home and trying to straighten things out, and it is wildly aided by being able to stream to speakers on every floor of my home, and it's doing its part in making me just a little bit neater.
I definitely understand where you're coming from, Professor Rosenworcel.
So not me.
Well,
you can tell, right? Yes.
Also looking at the value of Wi-Fi and unlicensed technologies, there have been several studies demonstrating the value of unlicensed spectrum for the U.S. economy, but sometimes the human impact of that value goes unstated. As you've had conversations with consumers and schools and libraries and businesses that use unlicensed technologies, have you heard any particular stories that have really resonated with you, and how does that impact your approach to policymaking?
Sure. I spend a lot of time talking about what I call the homework gap. So students all across the country who do not have regular access to the internet at home, and they can't get their homework done. And the homework gap is real. The United States Senate Joint Economic Committee found that there are 12 million students in this country who do not have broadband at home and can't do their schoolwork. Now, to me, that's the cruelest part of the digital divide. And when I look around the country for stories about how communities are trying to take their students out of that divide and close that gap, what strikes me most is some of the best stories come from communities thinking about Wi-Fi. I mean, we hear it all the time, the possibilities of putting Wi-Fi on school buses. It can make a huge difference, particularly in rural areas where students spend a long time on the bus going to and from school. And converting that ride time into homework time is an extraordinary thing. Not to mention all the bus people tell us that it makes the students better behave on those long trips, so they're all for it too. But there's this little town that I learned about called Winterset in Iowa. It's about 25 miles southwest of Des Moines. It's got 5,000 people. Apparently the lore is that they were going to call it Somerset, but it's so cold there, they decided that Winterset is a better name. Anyway, it's a small place, like lots of other small towns. And the school board there found that too many of the couldn't get their homework done when there was an internet component, because so many families did not have broadband at home. So they decided they could do something about it, something that was really low tech to solve this high tech problem. They got together with the Chamber of Commerce and went to their small downtown and asked every store and every business, did they have Wi-Fi, and would they make it available to students for their homework? And so then the town published a map, and barely anybody said no. So you had bakeries and insurance offices and stores all opening their doors to students, and every student who goes to school in this town now has access to this kind of map. And if little Winterset, Iowa can do that with Wi-Fi, I feel like a whole bunch of other communities can as well. So I think Wi-Fi could do its real part in helping close that homework gap and solve this problem that we have with the digital divide.
Look, I spend a great deal of time traveling too, or I did it anyway, and I hear it's about broadband access. But when I talk to people, okay, what type of access do you have? They don't necessarily know what Wi-Fi is in their everyday experience. They know that they can connect when they get to the library or the airport, and they don't really mind what conditions it's under. They're going to push yes, and they want access to. And our job, in my viewpoint, is to make that available as best we can. Wi-Fi fills so many needs. And so I don't have the anecdotes but I do hear from the people, is like, how can I get better service no matter where I am, and that's my job.
Great. Now, I know we've touched on this a little bit already, but about general bipartisan consensus that can be reached in this area, and I just wondered if there's anything that we haven't talked about yet in terms of spectrum policies that you both see a bipartisan way forward.
I think you're seeing here today, and you have seen for a number of years, good cooperation on both sides of the aisle. I'm so happy and pleased that the Congress has the House has a new caucus. The two leaders were here today presenting, and I think that's so helpful for our perspective when we go and testify that their leadership will only emphasize and amplify the work that we do, and then providing direction from them is so helpful for my activities. So I'm so blessed that this is something that is bipartisanship. So many things that we have gone into recently don't necessarily fall into those lines, but here's one where we all agree, and now it's a matter of fighting over particular bands. I think we're in a leading position and have good arguments of why we have the need for more unlicensed spectrum.
In the spirit of this question, I'm just going to co-sign all of that.
Great. Now moving on to 5G, which is obviously a big topic these days. We are seeing a wider field of businesses getting involved in 5G, including local businesses offering their own service, wireless ISPs, employers building strong access for their workforce, venues like stadiums and theme parks, municipalities, ports, and manufacturers. Both CTA and Wi-Fi Forward members make up a significant part of this growing part of the U.S. economy. And a question for the commissioners here is, can you talk about how you think about these dynamics and what it will mean to have some non-traditional players be a core part of the wireless network?
Well, for starters, I think it's fantastic. Bring it. I mean, we don't want a wireless world where the only entities that provide service are the biggest companies we know today. We want that world to be as diverse as possible, because then the innovation will be as diverse as possible. So I consider it a good and exciting sign that there are so many interests now in licensed and unlicensed that want to identify how wireless can help propel their businesses forward and create new services for all of us.
I would agree with that comment, and I would say, our job at the Commission, from my perspective, is not to provide any favoritism to smaller entities that want to get in, but also remove those barriers that they may have to being able to enter. And so I say, welcome to the, and then let the marketplace take it where it's supposed to go. There may be instances where a lot of those entities succeed, and others they may fail, and that to me is an exciting opportunity. We do know the consumers can benefit from all that activity.
Great. And do you see, beyond the comments you just made, anything else that the FCC can do to encourage investment in these areas? And also, what are you most excited about as a policymaker with this new ecosystem?
Well, I would say that the job of the Commission is to provide a solid framework or environment for investment. We don't hire anyone. We don't invest our own dollars, except for USF. That's a little different. But here it is to provide a framework for then private sector to take and run with it. And I think that's what we're doing. So I try to remove those special cases that we've had over the years and make clear that it is here are the broad guidelines we're operating on, and they advantage nobody and they detriment nobody. So go forward and conquer as the market will let you.
Well, I just think, for starters, we're going to have more innovation if we bring more entities and all sorts of use cases that involve Wi-Fi and other technologies where you don't have to ask permission before you use them. And then for licensed, I think the agency needs to give thought in every one of its spectrum auctions to structure them in such a way that we actually have a broad-based community bidding on those licenses, because the auctions will be more successful if we do so.
Well, building off that mention of spectrum auctions, looking at, I know there's been a lot of work on the 3.5 gigahertz band, and industry is excited about this, putting shared spectrum to productive use. And wondering if you have any comments about the next steps from a policy perspective about what a successful auction in this band would look like and what it would mean for spectrum sharing in the future.
Well, we still have tremendous work to do on 3.5. I'm working hard to make sure that ESC and the SASs are operational. I'm hopeful that can be done. I was hoping by the end of this year, but it's looking more like Q1. From my perspective, I don't have a better information, but I'm feeling that's the direction we're headed. And that means the initial deployment can move forward for the unlicensed portion, the GAA portion, and I think that's really vital to the project. And then I want to have the auction as soon as possible, but I don't determine the timing of an auction or items themselves as the chairman, and so I'm going to continue to have conversations with the chairman's office to try and see when we can schedule that auction, because the licensed portion is going to be just as important to all the entities that are operating in this space, that want to operate in this space.
So let me stand back from a distance and just talk about what I think is the most important thing in the 3.5 gigahertz band. It's actually the theoretical framework. For years, the FCC has thought about spectrum in these two binary poles, licensed versus unlicensed. The universe, we've created a hierarchy of spectrum interests, where we have incumbents with a preemptive right, a secondary license, and then an opportunistic use for all beneath that. And in the history of spectrum policy, that is really cool. It's almost radical. And if we can achieve some elements of that here, it's my hope that we'll start to see that in other spectrum bands, and not just domestically, but worldwide.
Well, I would only say to that, and people have held this out as a new paradigm, and I appreciate that view, and I appreciate what this may present. But I think we're still going to need, cleared, licensed bands, and that will be a tremendous priority for the Commission, and that's what you're seeing that we're trying to work through in C-band. It's a number of entities we're going to see in a millimeter wave. We're clearing the bands for purposes of auctioning them off and having licensed spectrum. There is a good place for the 3.5 paradigm. It will be a narrow one. I think it's good to have in our toolbox, but I don't think it's something that becomes the overall approach to how we continue spectrum policy going forward.
Okay, so now we disagree. I think on a going forward basis, we're going to have to be a lot more creative and invest a lot more energy in figuring out how we have opportunistic, unlicensed use and dynamic spectrum access across the board. And I think this is an interesting early test case, but I suspect that those efforts are going to continue in other spectrum bands moving forward.
I'll take that bet.
Now, looking a little bit beyond the FCC, I know last month the White House released a presidential memorandum calling for a balanced, forward-looking, flexible, and sustainable approach to spectrum management. The memo spoke generally about spectrum but did not mention unlicensed specifically. What do you think about this memorandum and with this new policy considerations around unlicensed? What do you see as the critical component of spectrum policy going forward?
I applaud the administration and had at the time, and I continue pushing forward on a new spectrum viewpoint. I think that's very helpful, sets the guidelines. We don't obviously, we're an independent agency, so we watch from afar and what they're planning to do. I think it's beneficial because part of the item, or part of the memorandum looks at reducing the amount of spectrum held by the federal government, requiring the mechanism to look at how much that they have on a going forward basis and reducing that. So I think it's incredibly valuable for shifting over to spectrum that we can then reallocate for different purposes, whether it be licensed or unlicensed, or the shared that we talked about. So I think there's value in all of that, but I wasn't part of the framework to get to the memorandum.
So we were getting along so well.
Yeah. I saved these questions for you.
You did. That's our fault. All right, we're gonna have some friction on this. I think there are two problems with the administration's approach. The first is we're about to go into study hall for 270 days and have the United States figure out what its approach should be for spectrum policy and 5G. I think that's a shame. The rest of the world is getting ahead of us. When it comes to critical mid-band spectrum, Spain, the United Kingdom, Italy, South Korea have already moved ahead. China's cleared bands. The world's not waiting for us, and I think that the decision to head to study hall right now is one that we're going to regret later. The second problem is just what you mentioned. Comb through that memorandum. There is not a single mention of unlicensed spectrum. And I think that's fundamentally flawed. Good spectrum policy requires both licensed and unlicensed airwaves, and the failure to mention that in the memorandum is a real problem.
I appreciate your point on study hall, but I would argue that the agency, the FCC is not waiting for the administration to move on 5G. We've been incredibly aggressive under the current chairman's leadership, and we're pushing forward on spectrum, we're pushing forward on regulatory relief, we're pushing forward on infrastructure to try to address all of those needs to make sure the United States remains the premier wireless provider both domestically and internationally. And so I appreciate that the administration put forward a new item, a new memorandum. I think there's value in doing so, being involved in that. And I think they didn't use the word unlicensed, so that doesn't cause they used the word balanced and shared, and I think that's helpful. I don't think it's meant to be a slight to the unlicensed community, in my opinion.
All right. Well, thank you for those comments. As we're wrapping up here, just one additional question for both of you. I know we're here today. It's the Wi-Fi Summit. We're talking about Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum, but I also wanted to give you both the opportunity to mention if there are any other issues or initiatives that you're both really excited about or engaged about at the Commission right now or looking towards 2019.
Well, okay, so, we can go from like nerdy to other level nerdy right now. So, earlier this year, I wrote a piece in Wired about thinking about next generation dynamic spectrum access and how we can move from the kind of centralized databases we're contemplating with the 3.5 gigahertz band to distributed ledger technology or blockchain. And I'm not talking about cryptocurrencies and coin offerings or store as value. But what I think we need to start thinking about is how we can lower the administrative expense of spectrum sharing and increase its efficiency. And developing a system of and making all of our use cases more efficient. So that is something that's a little out there, but it's something that I am excited about spending some more time on and thinking a little bit more about.
Look, anyone in this community knows that I've been engaged heavily on spectrum issues. C-band is a high priority for me moving forward as soon as we can on clearing 500 or at least 200 in that universe of new spectrum for wired purposes is going to be incredibly important. And I think that if you look at other things that some of them are smaller scale, I'm working on pirate radio or 911 feed aversion, very important issues, but smaller in terms of the focus of the attention. They're immediate, and there's something that the benefits can be had are incredibly valuable. So I'm scattered across on all of the issues that are before the commission. I incredibly appreciate the opportunity to engage on such a broad portfolio that the chairman has put forward, and hopefully it will continue in the next couple of years.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this lively discussion, and we look forward to continuing our work with both of your offices with Wi-Fi Forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to Rachel and to Commissioners O'Reilly and Rosenworcel. It's always a pleasure to hear both some friction and, but widespread agreement. I now have the pleasure of introducing Derek Peterson from Boingo Wireless. This is an American company that provides mobile internet access for wireless-enabled consumer devices. And Derek can connect me, but I believe the company has over 1 million small cell networks for cellular extension services and Wi-Fi access that reaches more than 1 billion customers annually. But I think more interestingly for our purposes here is that Boingo sits right at the intersection of next generation networks and integrating all of these varied technologies for the 5G experience particularly. Our next speaker, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Boingo, will share what Boingo is doing and his expertise with us. Please help me welcome Derek Peterson.
All right, so I'll get going. It's great to be here with Wi-Fi Forward. A lot of you probably have heard me speak in the past, and I've been speaking quite a bit about innovation for many years and the need for connectivity to be able to spur innovation. And I think that one of the key things about innovation when we start thinking about innovation and where I sit with Boingo, and I'll get into that in a minute, is that innovation in the past they used to always say the mother of innovation is necessity. And we've gone away from that, and I think it's important that we've gone away from that. It's no longer, necessity is still there, but more importantly than that, it's about efficiency and the importance of satisfaction that's become in our life. So when you think of that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we used to focus on, okay, what are the needs? And we look towards innovation for the future. We need to really look at that innovative spirit that we have as Americans and innovative spirit that we have as technologists and focus on the next level of those needs, which is really about efficiency and satisfaction and making sure that we're building technologies and opportunities for that. And if you look at all of the new innovations that have happened recently, it's because of that. So let me bring it back to Boingo a little bit to share you a little bit more about Boingo. So Boingo Wireless started off in 2001 and recognized that there was a need to be able to provide a mechanism to connect all of these Wi-Fi hotspots that were standing up all across the globe. And so they developed software to be able to make that happen. And that's how Boingo started off at. Recognizing from 2001 to 2007, being able to build that software to be able to create those connections, the company ended up recognizing there was a need to move beyond just establishing those connections, but actually making those connections more quality. And so in 2007, Boingo ended up focusing on deploying networks, wireless networks, and started deploying these Wi-Fi networks at a bunch of these airports that a lot of people know about us today. And that focus was trying to meet a need that people had of being able to have that connectivity. That need, of course, always has to be balanced against the financials that were available and whether or not the airports felt it was a necessity to supply that need for all of us that were traveling through there, and you have to balance the economics. So it started off was $99. I think the first price point was $99, went down to $79, and now today it's $9.95 to be able to have that connectivity. And now it's even free, as you see, because that need changed, and that need ended up becoming more important about the satisfaction of a person walking through that airport and be getting connected. And if you look at all the other innovative things that Boingo's done since then, we have military bases, Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps, where we provide internet connectivity for all of the soldiers, airmen, and other military service members on bases. They had a need to have connectivity. The connectivity that they was giving to them was, I go into my barracks, I have to go try to call to get somebody to come out and be able to establish an internet connection. After I get that internet connection established, I then go to the field, and then I come back, and then they move me to another barracks, and I have to go through that process all over again, and I go through that process 3 or 4 times a year, keep trying to move my internet connection around. It doesn't work for them. So we were engaged with the military to solve that problem for them, and work that lets them take it with them. If they go sit in their buddy's barracks room or their dorm room, then they still have that access no matter where they go. And that's expanding across the military now inside all of their locations, where they end up having their other morale and welfare services like the bowling alleys and the restaurants. And again, it was about solving a need, right? And then providing satisfaction for them, taking technology that's available to us and trying to figure out how to make that technology meet the needs of the future. And so that's what really the importance of Wi-Fi is it allows us to do that. I'll go over one more need because I think it's important. One of the things that we do at Boingo, one of the organizations I volunteer with is called the ITDRC. It's the Information Technology Disaster Recovery Center that ends up helping out whenever there's a national disaster. Right now I live up in LA, so we know about the fires up in LA. And what happened was a lot of the towers in the area got destroyed. There's no internet connectivity for a lot of people out there. And so what we were able to do, working with other partners like Tesla to be able to provide power, some satellite providers to be able to provide backhaul, and then installing Wi-Fi, we were able to allow people to have internet connectivity so that they can end up responding to others because their cell phones wouldn't work. Right? And so really when we start thinking about all these different use cases that we're able to do, it's really about recognizing that we need a tool set available to us that allows innovation to be able to solve these problems. And if we end up getting one technology or we get one provider, as was said earlier by others, getting involved and we don't allow the masses to get involved, we stop taking advantage of the most important resource we have in America, which is our people and their innovative spirit. And so we really need to focus on that. And Wi-Fi, when you look back and you look forward, and I always like looking back real quick, but I think it's also more important to look forward, the opportunity for innovation in unlicensed is dramatic. A couple examples here real quick because I know I'm running out of time. So my boss's mom has Alzheimer's. One of the things that he's able to do, even though he doesn't live in the city with her, is he has cameras in her house so that as she's wants to live by herself, he's able to watch her through Wi-Fi and know whether or not she's eating food and then talk to her and say, hey, it's time to go eat. Those kind of medical services are important. Another example, I like the medical ones. I have a chip in my hand. I think a lot of people who know me know this. So I have a near-field communication chip in my hand. It allows me to interface with my house. It's all Wi-Fi enabled and enabled to do that. But one of the things that I'm looking forward to is that same chip that, like one of my board members has, that lets him know when his heart's having palpitations so he can get called. So I was sitting in a board meeting recently. He had heart palpitations because he went on a big walk. And the doctor called him and said, hey, you had some problems. Why don't you come in? You've had some heart palpitations. These kind of things are made possible by that innovative spirit of being able to try these other things like putting a chip in your hand. Those things are going to enable that American spirit of innovation. So with that, I know I'm running out of time. Appreciate you listening to me, and hopefully we'll be able to grab a drink later and talk more. Thank you.
I'm just up here to tell you that we're going to take a short break, and that I'm delighted that Derek mentioned the near-field chip in his hand, because I saw him say it to policymakers, and they, stop? And then they actually start to think about Wi-Fi, so I didn't want to blow it for him if he wasn't going to mention it. So we'll take a quick break. I invite you to visit our exhibits, and then we'll come back for our final panel, followed by drinks and snacks and a reception and networking. So please go visit and look at the exhibits, and we'll call you all back here when it's time. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Programming will begin in 1 minute.
Okay, I'm very excited for this final discussion of the summit. I won't make my spectrum joke again, but this particular panel brings together an array of industry and policy experts to talk about how to create the balanced and equitable spectrum landscape we've heard so much about today. I'd like to introduce Michael Calabrese, Director of the Wireless Future Project with New America's Open Technology Institute, Deborah Collier, Director of Technology and Telecommunications Policy for Citizens Against Government Waste, Danielle Piñeres, Vice President and Associate General Counsel at NCTA, and Chris Szymanski, Director of Product Marketing and Government Affairs for Broadcom's Mobile Connectivity Division. They are moderated today by Paul Margie, partner and all-around expert with Harris, Wiltshire, and Grannis, who I believe needs no introduction, but I will just leave you with this introduction, which I tell every new member of our staff. Paul Margie will edit everything that you write for the rest of your life, so just get over it. Without further ado, help me welcome these experts to the stage.
Thank you. I think you split an infinitive there, just so you know. Okay. Okay, so we are your last panel, and so we are going to be quick here so you guys can get to your drinks, but we've got an incredible group of people here representing a broad swath of experience across the wireless industry from different perspectives. And what we're going to do is just ask some questions, but please be ready for your own, because I think they'll probably be better than mine. And I'll call on Maura if nobody does it, so please spare us that by preparing your questions now. Okay, Chris, I'm going to start with you because you came the farthest and can give us maybe the broadest view. So Broadcom is the world's largest maker of Wi-Fi chips. So you get to interact with all the different companies in all the different industry segments and all the different countries around. But you also get to see what's coming next. So what can you tell us about what's coming in the next generation of Wi-Fi? What is it going to enable? And for this crowd, how can federal policy support it?
Okay, thanks, Paul. So there's a lot. I'll try to keep it brief, but there's a lot there. So Wi-Fi 6, 802.11ax is really what's next. And it's really awesome because earlier today we heard a lot about, the emerging applications in the home, the farming. We heard about sort of the densification of networks, and a lot of those issues that we're seeing is really what Wi-Fi 6 solves. So typically when you see new generations of Wi-Fi, it's all about speeds and feeds. It's the peak speed on the box, okay? And so you'll have people saying a gigabit per second, but that's a single user in an optimal environment. What if I'm in downtown LA or downtown DC, and I've got a bunch of other people that are trying to live stream at an event? So Wi-Fi 6 has technology called uplink OFDMA and downlink OFDMA, and it makes it more of a scheduled transaction. What that's going to do is it's going to improve the range, it's going to improve the efficiency, so the spectral efficiency, and we're talking about policymakers, it's all about spectrum and efficient use of spectrum. What we've done with Wi-Fi 6 is it's going to be 40% more effective. We've reduced the overhead, you get more data per transmission. And we are now able to effectively steer the amount of bandwidth you need to a baby monitor, the amount of bandwidth you need to a Ring doorbell, the amount of data that you might need for an Ultra HD Netflix show. So rather than having the slowest device crowd out and slow down your network, we're able to optimize with Wi-Fi 6. So it's pretty exciting, and what that's going to do is it's going to give you a more reliable experience so that whether you're the only person in your home or you're also around a crowd in an airport or a venue, you're going to have a more reliable experience, and then application providers can build on that experience. So a lot of these emerging killer apps that everybody's waiting to hear about, we talk about VR, we've heard quite a few today from Charter, you're going to see a lot more of that roll out when companies know that the early adopters are going to get a reliable experience in these different places. So a lot of excitement surrounding Wi-Fi 6. What policymakers can do. The biggest thing that policymakers can do is really ensure that we have sufficient spectrum. So we've heard a lot about spectrum from the other people. And the amount of spectrum is certainly important, but it's also important that there are a sufficient number of larger channels. And it's got to be enough to make the market. So for Broadcom, a successful chip for us is somewhere around 500 million units. So when you're driving that sort of scale, that helps to drive the costs down, and that's what enables connectivity in these rural areas where people can provision broadband service to just about anybody with a device, right? And that's why you have such a high attach rate. And so what's really, really important is that we need more wide channels in the midband. And so the more policymakers can work on 5.9, work on 6 gigahertz. Right now, we don't have devices on the client side is operating at a smaller or lower bandwidth. So when you really want to start to see disruptive applications where they're pervasive gigabit streaming, peer-to-peer, that sort of thing, you're really going to need to see a sufficient number of 80 and 160 megahertz channels. So we're excited about what's happening in 6 gigahertz. And are really hopeful that the Commission can move very, very rapidly on that.
Thanks. And just to connect the first part of your answer with the second part of your answer, it might seem counterintuitive to some that a wider channel and therefore fewer channels in the same amount of spectrum is going to give you better performance because you might be stepping on each other. But you once explained to me how with a wider channel and Wi-Fi 6, you're able to more efficiently have a large number of people in a dense Wi-Fi area work together. Can you just give the 30 seconds of why that's the case?
Sure. So, with Wi-Fi 6, we have something called a tone plan. And what we've done is you basically have 2 megahertz resource units. And so if we have a 160 megahertz channel, we can schedule. So this is almost like it's a managed network, but it's not. It's done by the AP, so it's AP driven. And the AP can allocate the number of 2 megahertz resource units necessary to meet the needs of whatever that client device is. So it's very, very efficiently scheduled, and these users aren't stepping on one another. Whereas if you had sort of a random number of devices and channels, you might have these Wi-Fi devices backing off from one another. You'd have more collisions. So this ends up being more steering, more managed-like than sort of the random back-off component that we have today.
And built in from the beginning, Wi-Fi is thinking, I'm going to be in a dense area. I'm going to have to share. I'm not going to know who my neighbor is. And so I'm going to be able to make efficient use anyway with the big channels.
That's right.
Okay. So moving from the biggest producer of Wi-Fi chips to the biggest Wi-Fi networks in the country, we have the cable industry. And Danielle Piñeras, so cable industry now are the biggest Wi-Fi, have the biggest Wi-Fi networks in the country. But why Wi-Fi? Why have your companies, your member companies, chosen Wi-Fi for this connectivity job?
Sure, thanks, Paul. So cable companies are broadband companies, and really Wi-Fi is how cable customers experience their broadband connection. So over the last year, you've seen many of NCTA's members roll out gigabit speeds on their hybrid fiber coax networks. They've been working hard to get those speeds to customers in their homes and their businesses. But you can't have that speed then stop at the Wi-Fi router, right? If customers are experiencing broadband on their tablet, on their smartphone, on their laptop, that's a Wi-Fi connection. And so in order to get those gigabit speeds that that we're delivering via hybrid fiber coax into the hands of consumers, into their devices, we're going to need, as Chris was talking about, more of these 160 megahertz channels. That's where you start getting those gigabit speeds. You've got a gigabit about with AC potentially, or Wi-Fi 5, and then with Wi-Fi 6, potentially multi-gigabit speeds. And so we're going to need more of those. Right now, and you asked Chris about policy, right now in the US we have one 160 megahertz channel really under favorable technical rules that enable a lot of different use cases. And that's 80 megahertz at the bottom of the 5 gigahertz band and 80 megahertz up at Uni 3, which is one of the widest used Wi-Fi bands in the world. And that's just not going to be enough going forward to serve all of those devices in customer homes and in businesses. So I think going forward, in order to deliver these gigabit speeds into the hands of customers, we're going to need more 160 megahertz channels. And you've got to keep in mind that we're talking about lots and lots of devices in the home and lots of traffic. And so, we're, I think on average now, about 15 connected devices in a household, maybe more in some of the kind of most connected households in the country. And those devices carry a lot of traffic. Cisco just announced its new visual networking index numbers this year, for this year, and we saw 50% of all internet traffic traveled over Wi-Fi in 2017. It looks almost like 60%, 56.6% of internet traffic will travel via Wi-Fi by 2022. And so I think you've got both this incredible need for wider channels, as well as a need to meet this demand in homes and businesses with large numbers of devices, and all of this traffic that travels over Wi-Fi. So we're going to need more unlicensed spectrum to support all of those different use cases. There are a couple of studies that bear this out, and we see this a lot in commission filings, but I think it's good to talk about it too. There are a couple of different studies that both conclude that we're going to need almost a gigahertz, maybe more, of new unlicensed mid-band spectrum, as Chris was saying, over the next few years just to meet growing demand for Wi-Fi. So that's all going to be incredibly important. The FCC hasn't really made available a new unlicensed band suitable for Wi-Fi in more than a decade. It's been a long time. So as all of these use cases has developed and as Wi-Fi has really become an essential part of the connectivity experience, it's going to be really important for the Commission to really sit down and roll up their sleeves and take a look. And we're really pleased that Commissioner Riley and Commissioner Rosenworcel were here today talking about that and some of the efforts at the FCC to free up more spectrum. I did want to mention, in addition to Wi-Fi, the cable industry is doing a lot of other interesting things in the unlicensed space as well. We've got, in addition to kind of Wi-Fi as a broadband service, we have sort of smart home and home security products that rely on Wi-Fi. Some of our members have rolled out LoRa, which is low power wide area networking, to do things like smart connected cities, smart agriculture, some of the interesting new use cases that you heard Congressman Lott and Congressman McNerney talk about on an earlier panel. So that's all really exciting. We've also got testing and participation in standards bodies for shared spectrum for things like 3.5 gigahertz. And I think that'll be really interesting both in terms of potential mobile use cases, but also for extending the reach of our networks with fixed wireless as well, serving sort of people at that.
Great, and Deb from Citizens Against Government Waste, and so she's one of the few people who has legitimate IT skills and policy skills. There are not a lot of them. Most of us just make it up, but she doesn't. And so, and I think that nexus tells you something, which is, a lot of folks, your organization is out there fighting for lower regulations and to try to adopt policies that advance efficiency. And there's a perspective that the unlicensed bands are advantageous for the kind of investment you've heard from Broadcom and from the cable industry because of their low regulatory status. They're the least regulated approach to spectrum. In other bands, you have the FCC choosing a channel size or choosing a particular use case, or even in some cases mandating a particular technology, whereas in the unlicensed band, the very idea is that it's the opposite. So what do you make, kind of combining your IT side and your policy side, what do you make of the idea of unlicensed being the least regulatory space and what that might mean?
You know, licensed and unlicensed spectrum both have important roles in the whole telecommunications ecosystem. Unlicensed space is the area where experimentation can occur. It's where we can have new technologies develop and a lot of wonderful opportunities for increased connectivity. You know, just as Chris was mentioning about the different devices in the Wild West, but it's a great area for experimentation and the development of new technologies. And we really don't know where technology is going to lead us tomorrow. It's you know, we know where we are today, but unlicensed spectrum is where those new technologies have a field where they can experiment and grow.
And so you've heard today a little bit about some of the earlier things about the investment that's happening in the band and the amount of contribution to GDP. We heard this new study on 5.9. Do you think there's, I mean, a link between kind of the lack of command and control style regulation and the success of the band?
I think there is. When you look at bands that are allocated for specific use, that's all they can be used for. Whereas when you've got the unlicensed band, it's got just this wonderful opportunity to expand and grow with the technologies that are being introduced. Unfortunately, 5.9 is currently being held up by the by the Department of Transportation for one specific automobile technology that had been in development for 20 years. And it's only been deployed in one car, and that car is going to end production after the 2019 model year. But then again, at the end of the last administration, a mandate came out requiring the installation of that one specific technology in all light vehicles by the end of 2023, I believe. And thankfully, it's on hold right now, but it's still out there. The Department of Transportation made it pretty clear on October 25th that they're going to hang on to that spectrum in the 5.9 gigahertz band. So it's, you know, that's a concern.
Thank you. So, Michael, I want to ask you a question to ask for some perspective. And I think Michael does bring us perspective. He may be the only telecom policy person who I know who also legitimately fought against apartheid in South Africa to begin. So, I mean, that's a lot of perspective. But you've seen a bunch of different FCCs over a bunch of different years use a bunch of different techniques to try to achieve the stated goals of squeezing as much utility out of the spectrum as possible, supporting as much innovation as possible, and building a foundation to allow folks like these to build more connectivity in more places for more people. But what are we seeing about what works and what doesn't? And maybe take a broader scope than just the black and white licensed versus unlicensed. We're hopefully through the beauty contest stage, although who knows. But what are our levers and dials that we can turn as policymakers, and which ones do you think works best?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I don't know if you intended it, but apartheid may be a good metaphor for this sort of black and white, all or nothing dichotomy we've had in spectrum policy for too many years, and which went on too long. So I guess I'd mention three things that the technology, of course, as Chris said, advances on its own steam in private industry, but policymakers I think can promote more spectrum reuse, more dynamic spectrum sharing, and use it or share it requirements for vacant spectrum, for fallow spectrum. So just to kind of run run through each of these. Danielle mentioned that Wi-Fi now carries a majority of all internet traffic, and I would say even more telling, and this was mentioned earlier too, that 60 to 80% of all mobile device traffic is over Wi-Fi. It doesn't touch carrier networks or licensed spectrum, and that's on about half as much spectrum as the mobile carriers hold. So what that kind of efficiency is because of spectrum reuse. And spectrum reuse, and that, of course, in this room you can probably see 10 different Wi-Fi networks, and certainly, at the airport or other busy places, there's a lot of reuse going on, and that reuse also is thanks to combining low power with open access and best efforts. And so while there's still a role, obviously, for licensed spectrum and quality of service for certain purposes, for most of what we're doing, so much video that we're watching at home and so on, we just don't need, we don't need the exclusively licensed. What we need is wider channels and more of that spectrum. And then go on to dynamic spectrum sharing. I think I'm on Commissioner Rosenworcel's side of the question of whether the Citizens Band radio service now going into effect is a real breakthrough, which it is. I think 3-tier spectrum sharing is really a unique framework that's sort of a sign of the times, and it allows. We haven't talked much about it today, but GAA, the General Authorized Access tier, the bottom tier she mentioned, is effectively unlicensed. It's the same thing, it's just that you need to register because you have to protect the top tier, the U.S. Navy. And then there's also another unique factor in that band is that you also have coexisting on the same band priority access licenses. And so the two, for the first time, licensed and unlicensed, become coexistent and complementary in the same band. And then that leads to the third innovation I mentioned, which is a use it or share it requirement. So CBRS has a use it or share it requirement, meaning that all of that priority access licensing spectrum, even after the auctions and forever, to the extent it's not being used in a location, it's available for GAA use. The same as, for example, the 600 megahertz TV band is still available for unlicensed use after the incentive auction until the incumbent commences service. And I think we'll see a form of that at a very minimum, I hope, very soon, as Deb said, in the 5.9 gigahertz band, where the auto industry has not done anything in 20 years, and all that 75 megahertz is vacant. It's just a roadblock in a potential Wi-Fi superhighway.
So, Chris, I'll turn back to you for a perspective on a different axis. So we've heard about perspective on the policy levers axis. Let's talk about it on a geographic basis. So one of your jobs is to fly around the globe and work to expand access for unlicensed in a lot of different countries. Wi-Fi gap. What does the U.S. need to do to make sure that we're keeping pace? And also, as a manufacturer, you've got Wi-Fi chips in 182 countries. What does international economy of scale mean to you from a band perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So scale, 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 right? So I said that a successful chip for us is 500 million units. And these chips typically have a short shelf life, right? Because technology keeps emerging. OEMs want the latest and greatest, and so it's a continual upgrade. And something that probably near and dear to Congressman McNerney's heart, as you go to newer chips and smaller geometries, they're more energy efficient. So new Wi-Fi chips, AX, are going to be about 7x more energy efficient as well. So all of this sort of continual march requires a huge number of devices, and that requires global economies. And so, to see people follow sort of the European ETSI more prescriptive regulatory path, or sort of the U.S. path. But we'll see these countries within Europe sort of drive forward. And so right now in Europe, back in 2017, the European Commission issued a mandate. And they issued a mandate for the technical groups within postal telecommunication community to study whether or not the bottom part of the 6 gigahertz band could be made available for Wi-Fi. And in Europe, it is a grinding sort of technical adversarial process where you have government regulators, you have the incumbents, and then you have the new entrants all coming together and trying to decide under what assumptions we can study to determine whether or not sharing is feasible. So you have the people that don't want anybody there that are saying, well, sky is falling and the worst case scenario. And then, so it's been a very dynamic process. And so the first stage of that process is going to end early March, where a draft report will be issued to the European Commission in response to the mandate. And my general expectation is that Europe's going to be exploring unlicensed use along sort of 3 veins, sort of a more standard power outdoor use using registration, light license.
This is all in 6.
All in 6.
All in 6.
Yeah, light license database. I think they're going to enable indoor low power for more sort of consumer residential use. And then I think they're going to enable sort of a very low power, more sort of mobility use. And then client devices obviously can, like phones and laptops, will be able to attach.
And so what would it mean? What would it mean for you and your competitors if you do get the U.S.? You heard a little earlier today Commissioner O'Reilly say that he wants to get the 6 gigahertz proceeding done by the end of the year. If you're able to get 6 gigahertz moving in the U.S. and 6 gigahertz moving in Europe along the same time frame, what's that going to mean for the rest of the world, and what's that going to mean for your economies?
I mean, it's huge. So you just have to look at, Gartner, iSupply, other reports, and you can see where, at least for my company, we focus on the hero class market, right? So, typical smartphones, $500+ right? And so you see a lot of that maybe in certain places in Asia and in the U.S. and Europe. And so those markets are incredibly important. And so if we have some sort of harmonization there, definitely enough to make a market. And what you're going to see is companies leaning forward very aggressively. We're all leaning forward because of this huge market opportunity in these 2 markets.
Great. And Danielle, we've heard today, if there's like one refrain today, you heard the congressman and then the commissioners and then Deb and Michael both talking about the 5.9 band, right? It seems like there is a lot of energy behind this band. There was an article just earlier this week talking about that the logjam may finally be broken and the FCC is moving. It seems like you've got congressional support, you've got FCC support, and you've got support from groups from different perspectives. But why is this band so important to Wi-Fi? You talked about the Wi-Fi gap and the number of megahertz that are needed, but why 5.9?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So 5.9 from our perspective still remains the best near-term option for additional Wi-Fi spectrum. And one of the reasons is for the economies of scale reason that Chris was mentioning. So 5.9 is right next to one of the most widely used Wi-Fi bands in the world called Uni 3 here in the US. Or 5.8 elsewhere, and that's where we can get the first contiguous 160 megahertz channel, potentially under very favorable technical rules that would enable a lot of different use cases. So 5.9 is important because of it's right there. You can get those economies of scale very quickly. I think Broadcom and others could put 5.9 into chipsets very quickly because it's so close to an existing Wi-Fi band. So I think we'd be poised to bring 5.9 online very quickly if the commission could move forward and authorize unlicensed use there. And in addition, despite the rhetoric from the DSRC community that deployment is just around the corner, there have really been just a few pilot projects over the last 20 years, and as Deb mentioned, one make of one vehicle deploying DSRC. And so 5.9 is really unique too, in that it's really the most underutilized mid-band spectrum out there. in the vast majority of the country, the vast majority of the time, there'll be no DSRC transmissions today. And so it's actually a fairly different situation than in 6, where there's a lot of different incumbents to protect. Here at 5.9, there'd really be the potential for widespread Wi-Fi use under very favorable technical rules. And then, as I mentioned, again, it's the 160 megahertz channel that will then enable broadband providers who are delivering gigabit speeds to homes to actually put that gigabit speed into people's hands, into their devices. I wanted to just touch again on that RAND report as well that came out today. I think we talk about 5.9 being important for broadband providers, but it's incredibly important for the U.S. economy as well. We've heard for a long time about the value of unlicensed spectrum. I think we mentioned today, $525 billion in 2017 alone to the U.S. economy. But, just with this one band, if the FCC could enable unlicensed access to 5.9, the RAND report says this could be a $100 billion benefit to the U.S. economy annually, just in terms of GDP contribution, with more in terms of economic surplus on an annual basis. And so I think it's important to recognize that it's not just important for broadband providers and for getting this gigabit speeds into the hands of consumers, but also important in terms of an economic benefit to the country. So NCTA had filed back in October a request at the Commission for a further notice of proposed rulemaking. We're really pleased to see that there's some momentum, hopefully, in moving that forward. We really think now is the right time for the Commission to take a fresh, holistic look. And why is that? We see, first of all, there's great demand on the Wi-Fi side and need for more unlicensed spectrum. Interest has really changed, we think, in the automotive sector, away really from this 20-year-old DSRC technology that relies on connectivity between vehicles to the kind of LiDAR and radar and cameras that don't rely on 5.9 at all, in order to enable automated vehicle technologies. And on the connected vehicle side, there may be some interest in cellular V2X, another technology that would like access to the 5.9 band, but that would take a complete rethink of the FCC's rules that today are very specific to DSRC technology. And then in addition, Chris had talked a lot about 6 gigahertz. The FCC has this NPRM out there for 6 gigahertz, which is sort of right on the other side of 5.9. So you've got the widest used Wi-Fi band in the world on one side, the potential for additional unlicensed spectrum at 6 gigahertz on the other side, which really would leave auto safety technology as sort of an isolated island in the middle of oceans of Wi-Fi. And so, certainly we hope that the Commission will move forward with an FNPRM to take a fresh look at the band, consider all of these issues, ask all the right questions to tee this up.
Great. Deb, I want to turn back to something that you said at the end of your comments here, because when I talked to Michael, I said, well, maybe the era of beauty contests are over, but maybe not, right? We've seen a resurgence in companies asking the FCC to set band plans or rules that would promote a particular technology or a particular business plan to create barriers to entry for others. And you and I talked about the idea of unlicensed or licensed, both being these incredible success stories for the FCC. Both of them are in the future. Nonetheless, we continue to see people, the 5.9 band is one example, whether it's DSRC or whether it's CV2X, whether it's companies coming in and saying, hey, the FCC rule should mandate it should be one use of this technology, of this band, or even one technology. What do you make of that, this kind of back to the future, back to the beauty contest of the 1950s moment that we're in?
Yeah, I have real problems with the government mandating technology because, there's that old adage that, moving at the speed of government, which is never fast, and technology moves a lot faster than the government ever can. So, if you mandate spectrum for one specific use, similar to what's happened with the DSRC and the 5.9, nothing else can be used in that band, and the technology becomes antiquated before it's even implemented. So, by industry to grow, it does not allow technology to expand and create new wonderful things that we can use, and it really hamstrings the spectrum.
So, Michael, I want to close with you before we go and see if there are people who have questions. I asked you last time about kind of what the lessons of the past are. I want to ask you a little bit about what you see coming down the pike. So, you've heard about these studies saying that we need a gigahertz or more of unlicensed spectrum just to keep up with today's use of unlicensed. You also heard Dr. Katz say he has no idea what's coming next, and each time he does a study, he sees new applications that are providing the economic benefits. So what do you see coming for unlicensed? Or is the FCC, or are we going to get enough spectrum to make this happen? Have we moved into a sharing paradigm enough that we're going to start seeing a balanced spectrum?
Realizes, and once, one sign of that, so we've talked a little bit about, I mentioned earlier, of course, the citizens band, and that's not even implemented yet. It will be, and then I think we'll see next year, early next year, that the spectrum access system works quite well. But that's actually just the beginning. I think something that's not really appreciated in terms of the huge potential to go from scarcity to abundance is that just in the past 4 or 5 months, the Commission has adopted a trilogy of NPRMs for 3 different bands that will most likely rely on databases for the coordination, automated frequency coordination of spectrum. And so those are, in 6 gigahertz in the C-band, the downlink C-band 3.7 to 4.2, and then up in the spectrum, the open access portion of the spectrum frontier, 37 to 37.6 gigahertz.
And different kinds of databases, right?
And
so
different
some
kinds.
heavier and like in 6, a much lighter.
Right, exactly. Just because there's a huge difference, for example, between TV white space, which is extremely static, versus the citizens band. Because it's 3-tier, it's much more dynamic and complicated. So 6 gigahertz we hope that, you always prefer that you don't need a database, actually, because you don't want to add overhead to open spectrum access. But to the extent that, and we should not need it for indoor use in 6 gigahertz, but to the extent that for outdoor use, it may be needed, it can be quite straightforward because all of the incumbents are extremely fixed and well specified. So that's one example we're going to be working through. But that's already, we don't know the comment deadline yet, but that's already a proposal. As is in 3.7 to 4.2, most of the attention has gone to clearing up from the bottom of the band some portion, 100 or 200 megahertz, of what's being currently used by the fixed satellite service. But an equal part of that NPRM is to authorize from the top, some portion from the top down in the band, coordinated shared access for point of high capacity fixed wireless, point to multi-point, on a very localized basis, meaning that out in exurbs and small towns and especially in rural areas, you can get high capacity deployments that are just coordinated in. So you could look at it as being unlicensed in the extent that it's open to anyone to use, although the proposal in the NPRM is that there'll be first-in licensing rights to those who actually deploy, once they deploy. And then the 37 to 37.6 gigahertz, which is under the radar screen for most people, we've been supportive of that being a kind of a CBRS for the spectrum frontier. And it is 600 megahertz. It has some federal use that needs to be worked around, but otherwise it's open. It's not part of the auctions that are coming up. And the Commission still needs to work out, on what basis. They're saying it's going to be shared access licenses, something somewhere between PAL and GAA, and we need to work that out. And I'm not saying that's unlicensed, but again, it's another opportunity to, I think it'll be open access. You'll be able to coordinate in, not clear what kind of, rights you'd have. It may be very much like I described for the portion of the C-band that continues on for the fixed satellite service where you can coordinate in shared use. So there's a lot of exciting things that are happening to try to squeeze a lot more use out of these bands that are occupied already by incumbents, and hopefully it'll be over 1,000 megahertz in the 6, but there's these other opportunities as well.
Thank you. So, questions from the audience for this august crowd, or do we have to hear more talk about Notre Dame for? Okay, please.
I'm troubled by the discussion today of many speakers of licensed and unlicensed, black and white. We have unlicensed is always better, and unlicensed is homogeneous. Let me go back to the early 80s. The goose that laid the golden egg is the ISM band unlicensed that had very, very simple rules, if I remember right at the time, a half page in the CFR format. Within a few years of that, 2 other unlicensed bands were created, UNAI and unlicensed PCS. Unlicensed, we can argue why they were failures, but they were much more complicated in multiple pages in CFR format. And I'm afraid that by the time some of the things people are talking about here, like the DSRC sharing, if it isn't done carefully, it'll be as complicated sharing. You maybe have sharing access to the 5.9, but it might be as complicated as UNAI or unlicensed PCS is. And the focus on unlicensed is naturally good, leaving apart how much technical detail gets in there. And the reason the technical detail was in there was not because FCC wanted it in. The industry petitioners asked FCC to put all that gobbledygook in UNII and UPCS. So do we really want more unlicensed, or do we really want more unlicensed which has technical flexibility that lets things evolve in the way they want? Because Wi-Fi was a winner of a Darwinist teams don't necessarily result in.
So what do folks think? I mean, is a more megahertz enough, or is it that we have to have more megahertz with kind of pro-investment, pro-innovation rules? We certainly all know bands where we've had, death by 1,000 cuts by lots of little rules buried, layered on top of each other. We've got opportunities in 5.9 and 6 to go forward, but are there layers of complication in those 2 bands that could undo the good that the FCC might accomplish? Chris?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We can enable truly frictionless sharing. I mean, it can be perfect. No edge cases. No one's going to enable it. It's way too expensive, right? And one of the things that has made Wi-Fi and unlicensed technology so successful is the ability to coexist at a good, solid, low price point. And that's made it adopted in billions of devices today. And so it's important as we're looking at this, do the geometries, network geometries, the signals, the behaviors, are they bursty? We start looking at some of the technical details and we say, okay, when we place these 2 technologies together, what happens? It's a little science experiment. And then rather than bringing in something that's totally not required because the regulation was drafted and someone was fond of it and says, hey, here's a nice package box, let's put this here, we should absolutely not do that. It's the best way to kill the band. So we should be really focused on only those rules that are necessary to protect the incumbents and nothing else.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that as well. And I agree with Chris. You see the most investment in unlicensed bands in those bands where the technical rules are the simplest. So, for instance, Uni 3 has become this workhorse band. Uni 1 as well. I think you see less usage in the Uni 2 bands where you're burdened by dynamic frequency selection to protect government radar operations. So, applying that in the 5.9 context, I'm glad you raised that. There was sort of a focus on a few years ago when this test plan was conceived of sort of looking at opportunities for co-channel sharing, which would admittedly be, I think, pretty difficult. It could be costly, it could be complex. And so, we were pleased to see that OET's test report looked not only at that co-channel sharing, it's good to know that it works, but I think given that we've got a DOT now that's sort of moved beyond a tech-specific mandate to say, commit publicly to technology neutrality here, if it's unlikely we'll see a mandate, I think it's unlikely we'll see the kind of widespread DSRC deployment that might require that kind of co-channel sharing that would be so costly and so complex. And so we were really pleased to see the OET test report focus, talk about the co-channel sharing, but also talk about adjacent channel opportunities here. As I mentioned, it could be that the FCC, that the best policy outcome here is to think about alternative homes for automotive safety. But if the FCC wanted to go forward with a band split approach that would enable robust Wi-Fi operations under very favorable technical rules without having to do that kind of co-channel sharing, and coexist with some adjacent channel, automotive safety operations. I think that would be a much preferable path forward than the kind of co-channel sharing that is really costly and complex.
Great. So we're going to have access to all these guys in the back here, and so maybe I can ask that folks can ask individual questions, because I think we're just about out of time, but I want to say thank you to everybody for participating. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Just one final thanks. Thank you to the panel, to our moderator, Paul Margie, and to all of you for sticking around with us today. We'll have a reception. Please have fun with the exhibits and chat, and thanks so much for joining us.